Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. All right, I'll do my best to write this out for you. It's not something I talk about much, because honestly, who'd believe me? But since this is a place for these kinds of things, I guess I'll share what happened to me back in 2007. I still live in Morton, Indiana. It's a small town. You've probably never heard of it. Lots of woods, lots of fields, the kind of place where you know your neighbors and not much happens. Or at least, that's what I thought. It was August, I remember, because the heat during the day was brutal, but the nights were starting to get that little bit of coolness to them, enough to make sitting on the porch bearable. This particular night, it was a Tuesday, I think. Yeah, a Tuesday. I was out on my porch around 10:30 at night. I'd just finished watching some TV and wanted a bit of fresh air before heading to bed. I had a beer with me, just sipping it, listening to the crickets. It was dead quiet otherwise. Peaceful. My property has a couple of big old apple trees off to the side of the yard, maybe 50 feet from the house. They were heavy with fruit that time of year. I was just sitting there, rocking in my chair, when I heard this rustling sound coming from the trees. At first, I thought it was just raccoons. We get a lot of them, little bandits after the apples, but this sounded bigger, heavier. It was a rustling, but then there were these soft thumps, like someone was up in the branches. I figured it was maybe some kids from down the road messing around. Teenagers sometimes cut through my property as a shortcut, though not usually this late. I sighed, a little annoyed, and stood up. I leaned over the porch railing and hollered, "Hey, get out of there! Go on home!" As soon as I shouted, the noise stopped. Completely. The rustling, the thumping, everything just cut off. It was so sudden, it was unnerving. It wasn't like an animal scrambling away. It was like a switch had been flipped. The silence that fell over the yard was thicker and heavier than before. I stood there for a second, listening, my ears straining. Nothing, just the crickets, which had even gone quiet for a minute. Then, from the direction of the apple trees, I heard a heavy, solid thud. It wasn't a branch falling. It was the sound of something with real weight hitting the ground. A big bag of potatoes, that kind of sound. My gut tightened. Right after that, I heard footsteps. Not the pitter-patter of a deer or the scuttle of a raccoon. These were slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps. Crunch, 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 on the dry summer grass and leaves. They were moving away from the trees, heading towards the thicker woods that border my property. I felt a chill, even in the warm air. My first thought was, that was no kid. The way it walked, it was a two-legged walk, I'm sure of it. But it was so heavy. I stood frozen on the porch until the sound of the footsteps faded into the distance. I went inside, locked the door, and tried to tell myself it was just a big deer, maybe an elk, though we don't really get elk around here. I didn't fully believe it, but it was easier than thinking about the alternative. I went to bed, but I slept like crap. Every little noise had me jerking awake. The next few days were normal. I started to brush it off. Then, about 3 nights after that first thing with the trees, I was driving home from my brother's place just after sundown. My headlights swept across the field that runs alongside the road before my turnoff, and I saw it just for a second. Something big and dark, moving across the far end of the field. It wasn't running like a deer, all graceful and leaping. It was moving fast, but in a powerful, ground-eating lope. It was upright. It crossed the entire width of the field in just a few seconds and vanished into the tree line. My heart was hammering in my chest. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow, but I knew what I saw. It was tall and bulky, and it moved on 2 legs. I didn't tell anyone. Who was I gonna tell? Hey, I saw a big dark thing run across a field. Yeah, right. But the big night, the one that still haunts me, was a couple of nights after that. It was a Friday. I remember because I was relieved the work week was over. I was in my living room reading a book. My dog Buddy, a big old German Shepherd, was asleep on the rug. Everything was calm. Then Buddy lifted his head. His ears went straight up. A low growl started deep in his chest. It wasn't his usual, "I hear a squirrel" growl. This was different. This was a threat growl. The hair on his back stood straight up. He got to his feet, his body rigid, and he started barking like crazy towards the patio door. Not the front door, but the sliding glass door that leads to the back patio and the yard. My blood went cold. "Buddy, quiet," I said. But he wasn't having it. He was frantic, barking and snarling, pawing at the glass. The sound was deafening in the quiet house. I put my book down slowly. My heart was starting to thump hard against my ribs. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, though I didn't really want to know. I walked over to the door, my legs feeling like rubber. The curtains were drawn, but there was a gap between them. Buddy was focused on that gap. I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat, and I peered through the slit in the curtains, and I saw it. It was standing in the middle of my backyard, maybe 40 feet from the house. It was just standing there, completely motionless. The yard light, one of those dim, yellowish ones on a pole, was on, casting a weak, hazy glow over everything. This thing was standing right at the edge of the light, half in shadow. It was massive, I mean huge. It had to be at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It was built like a gorilla, but it was standing straight up on 2 legs. Its body was just a solid, bulky shape, covered in what looked like shaggy black hair. It was so dark it seemed to suck the light right out of the air around it. I couldn't see a neck. Its head just seemed to sit right on its broad, powerful shoulders. I couldn't make out any features on its face. It was just a dark shape. But I knew. It was looking right at me. I could feel its gaze. It was the most intense, primal feeling of being watched I have ever experienced in my life. My whole body locked up. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, staring back at this thing through a pane of glass. My mind was screaming, but no sound came out. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a person in a suit. This was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be real. Buddy was going absolutely insane beside me, barking and throwing himself at the door, but the thing outside didn't even flinch. It just stood there, a monument of shadow and muscle staring right into my soul. That moment felt like it lasted an hour. We were locked in that silent, terrifying standoff. Me in my safe, warm living room, and it out there in the dark, a creature from a nightmare standing casually on my lawn. Then it moved. It didn't turn like a person turns. It was smoother than that. Its whole upper body rotated towards the woods, and then it just melted. That's the only word for it. It took a step and seemed to dissolve into the darkness under the trees. 1 second it was there, a solid, impossible thing in my yard, and the next second it was just gone. The space where it had been standing felt emptier than empty. The second it disappeared, Buddy stopped barking. He let out a little whimper and backed away from the door, his tail between his legs. He came and pressed himself against my leg, trembling. I was trembling too. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely function. I stumbled to the phone and called the sheriff's office. My voice was shaking when I talked to the dispatcher. I told her there was something in my yard, a big animal, and that it had been staring into my house. I didn't say what I thought it was. I just said it was big and black and walking on 2 legs. She sent a deputy out. While I was waiting, pacing my living room, the memory of something else hit me. Earlier that evening, before it got fully dark, I'd taken the trash out to the bin at the side of the house. I'd heard a rustle in the bushes by the tree line, and I'd frozen looking over, and I saw it, not clearly, but I saw a dark shape partially hidden behind a thicket. It was just watching me. I'd felt a jolt of fear and taken a step back towards the house. The moment I moved, it charged. It didn't make a sound. It just burst out of the bushes and covered the ground between us in 2, maybe 3 massive strides. It came from about 30 feet away to within 20 feet of me in a heartbeat. It was unbelievably fast, and then just as suddenly it veered off and ran parallel to the tree line before disappearing into the woods. At the time, I'd convinced myself it was a large black dog, a stray or something, but now, standing there shaking after seeing it full on in the yard, I knew it was the same thing. It hadn't been charging to attack me, it was testing me or showing me it could. The deputy showed up. He was a young guy. He walked around the yard with a flashlight, saw nothing, of course. He was polite, but I could tell he thought I was just a spooked homeowner who'd seen a bear. He said to call if I saw it again. I felt like an idiot, but more than that, I felt terrified because I knew what I saw, and I knew it wasn't a bear. I talked to a couple of my neighbors the next day, cautiously. I didn't lead with, "I saw a Bigfoot." I just asked if they'd seen any strange animals around lately. Old Man Miller, who lives a half-mile down the road, said he'd seen a big dark thing moving through the edge of his cornfield a week back. He thought it was a person until he saw how fast it moved. Another neighbor mentioned her dogs had been going crazy at night for the past couple of weeks, so I wasn't the only one. The final piece of this whole messed up puzzle happened a few days later. I was out in the woods that border my property, not too far from where I'd seen it disappear that night. I was digging for sassafras roots. My grandma taught me how to make tea from them. I was on my knees, digging with a small trowel, when I pushed aside a thicket of briars and saw it, a nest. That's what it looked like anyway. It was a big structure, maybe 6 or 7 feet across, made of thick branches that had been snapped off, not cut. They were woven together in a rough circle, like a giant bird's nest on the ground. In the center, the ground was matted down, like something heavy had been lying there, and all through the branches, tangled in the twists and knots, were clumps of hair. Long, coarse, black hair. My stomach dropped. This was it. This was where it had been. I reached out, my hand shaking, and pulled a few strands free. They were thick, like horsehair, but coarser. They were dark brown, almost black. I just held them in my hand, staring at this crude bed in the middle of the woods, and I felt a fresh wave of pure dread. This wasn't a temporary resting spot. This looked established. I got the hell out of there. I didn't touch anything else. I went straight home and called my brother. I told him everything, finally. He's a skeptic, but he knows I'm not a liar. He agreed to come back with me in a couple of days to see it. When we went back, armed with a shotgun just in case, the nest was gone. I don't mean it was disturbed. I mean it was gone. The branches were scattered everywhere, like they'd been ripped apart. The matted down center was all kicked up. The hair was gone. There was no sign that anything had ever been there except for the scattered debris. It was like it had been deliberately dismantled and cleaned up. We searched the area for an hour and found nothing. Not a single strand of hair. Not a footprint. Nothing. My brother tried to tell me maybe a bear had done it or some kids, but he didn't sound convinced. He saw the look on my face. He knew. That was the end of it. I never saw the thing again. I never found another nest. But I know, with a certainty that sits like a cold stone in my gut, that something is living in those woods. Something that doesn't want to be found. Something intelligent enough to know it was discovered and to erase the evidence. We stay vigilant after dark now. I never go out at night without a powerful flashlight, and I always lock the doors, even though I know a lock wouldn't mean a thing if it really wanted to get in. The fear of its presence has never really left. It's been years, but sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch on a quiet August night, I'll hear a rustle in the apple trees, and I'll freeze, my beer halfway to my lips, and I'll wait, and I'll remember the feeling of those eyes staring at me through the glass, and I just know, it's still out there. Story 2. It was still dark when I woke up that morning, the kind of dark that feels heavy and thick, especially out there in the Merritt Island refuge. My alarm hadn't even gone off yet. I just opened my eyes and knew it was time. I've been a fishing guide out here for 7 years, and my body just knows when it's a fishing day. The air in my little cabin was cool, but I could already feel the wet heat waiting outside, the kind that sticks to your skin by 7 in the morning and doesn't let go. I was guiding 2 brothers from Ohio that day. They'd booked a sunrise trip, wanted the full Florida wilderness experience. I remember thinking, as I sipped my coffee in the dark, that they were gonna get it. The weather had been weird all week, unseasonably dry with this constant nagging wind that never seemed to quit. It made the fishing tricky, but the mosquitoes weren't as bad, so I figured it was a fair trade. I met them at the boat ramp just before 5. They were exactly what I expected. Big guys, loud, wearing brand new fishing vests and hats covered in lures they probably didn't know how to use. They were excited, talking over each other about the bass they were going to catch. I just nodded, loaded their gear into my flat-bottomed John boat, and tried to get my head in the game. My mind was on the water, on the wind direction, on the spots I'd scouted earlier in the week. I had no reason to think about anything else. We set off in the dark, the electric trolling motor humming almost silently as we slid away from the ramp and into the maze of mangrove tunnels. The wind was already at it, a steady push from the east that rustled the leaves and made the water slap against the roots. It was loud enough that I had to tell the brothers to keep their voices down if they wanted to see any wildlife. They quieted after that, and the only sounds were the wind, the water, and the distant cry of a heron. The plan was to hit a secluded cove, I know, a spot where a sandbank juts out into the water, creating a perfect little ambush point for snook at first light. It's a beautiful place, especially at sunrise. As we navigated the final narrow channel, the sky began to lighten from black to a deep, bruised purple. You could start to see the silhouettes of the mangroves against it. That's when I saw it. At first, my guide brain didn't register it as anything strange. Your eyes play tricks on you in that half-light. You see stumps that look like animals, and animals that look like stumps. About 100 yards ahead, on the far end of the sandbank, there was a dark, hunched shape. I figured it was a black bear. We get them out here sometimes, digging for crabs. It was big, and it was moving, its shoulders working as it dug into the sand with its hands. I cut the trolling motor and let the boat drift, putting a finger to my lips to signal the brothers to be quiet. The younger one, the more excitable of the two, raised his camera. I remember feeling a little annoyed, thinking he was going to spook a perfectly good bear sighting with a noisy shutter click. We drifted closer, maybe 70 yards, then 50. The wind was at our backs, blowing our scent away from the bank and masking any sound we made. The boat was utterly silent. The brothers were frozen, just staring, and that's when I started to feel the first prickle on the back of my neck. Something was off. The proportions were wrong. Bears are bulky, but this thing, it was all wrong. It was sitting back on its haunches, but even then, it looked too tall. And the color wasn't right for a black bear. In the growing light, I could see it was a reddish-brown like wet cedar wood or old rust. It had this long, matted-looking hair, but it wasn't shaggy like a bear's. It was stringier. My brain was scrambling, trying to find a file for this. A feral hog? No, way too big. A person? No one comes out here and no one sits in the mud digging like that at sunrise. My mind just kept hitting a wall. We were maybe 40 yards away when it stopped digging. It went perfectly still. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Its head, which had been down, focused on the sand, slowly began to rise. I felt my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I knew. Then, in one fluid, powerful motion, it stood up. It uncoiled to a height that made my stomach drop. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least a foot taller than me, maybe more. 7 feet easy, but it wasn't just the height, it was the sheer mass. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, like a refrigerator. I'm not being poetic. That's the only thing that comes close. It was built like a walking refrigerator, thick and solid from its chest down to its powerful-looking legs. Its arms were long, hanging past its knees and caked with dark mud from where it had been digging, and then it turned its head and looked right at us. The face. God, the face. It was the most unsettling part. It wasn't an animal's face. It wasn't a man's face. It was something in between. It had a heavy brow ridge that shadowed its eyes, but I could see them clearly. They were dark and intelligent. It had a flat nose and a wide mouth, but there was a presence there, a primitive, knowing awareness. It didn't look confused or startled. It looked like it was assessing us. Its eyes moved from me to the two brothers, and back to me. Time just stopped. The whole world shrank down to that sandbank, and those eyes locked on mine. The wind was still howling, whipping my hair around my face, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't hear anything but the blood pounding in my ears. My hands were gripping the side of the boat, and I could feel the cold, damp aluminum under my fingers. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, panicked hammering that made my whole body feel weak. The thing didn't make a sound. It didn't snarl or roar. It just stared. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 3 or 4 seconds, long enough for me to see every detail. The way the matted hair lay on its massive shoulders, the sheer bulk of its torso, the utter stillness of its body. It was the stillness of a predator, not prey. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't scramble. It turned its body away from us with a kind of deliberate, powerful grace, and took a step toward the wall of mangroves. Its gait was smooth, its long arms swinging slightly. It took another step, and then it was at the edge of the vegetation. It didn't push through the branches. It seemed to just part them. One moment it was there, its reddish-brown form stark against the green and grey of the mangroves, and the next, it was gone. It was absorbed into the shadows and the leaves without a sound. There was no crashing, no snapping of twigs, nothing. It just vanished. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the sight of the thing itself. The wind was still blowing, the water was still lapping, but it was like those sounds were coming from a different universe. We were sitting in a bubble of pure, unadulterated shock. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I let it out in a ragged gasp. My hands were trembling. I looked down at them, these things that were supposed to be my hands, and they were shaking so hard I had to clench them into fists. The older brother was the one who broke the silence. His voice was a low, choked whisper, completely different from the loud, confident tone he'd had back at the ramp. What in the absolute hell was that? I just shook my head. I had no words. My mind was a scrambled mess of bear and man and monster, and none of it fit. The younger brother, the one with the camera, was staring down at it in his lap. He hadn't taken a single picture. He'd been so stunned he'd forgotten to press the button. He looked up at me, his face pale. That was a Sasquatch. He said the word like it was a fact, like he'd just identified a blue heron. There was no question in his voice, just a flat, stunned certainty. And in that moment, I knew he was right. All the crazy stories, the blurry videos, the legends I'd laughed at, they weren't stories anymore, they were this 7-foot-tall, refrigerator-built, primitive-faced creature that had just looked into my soul and then walked away like it owned the place. We didn't speak another word. I fumbled for the controls on the trolling motor, my fingers clumsy and numb, and turned the boat around. We didn't go to the fishing spot. We didn't talk about fishing. We just left. The trip back through the mangroves felt 100 times longer. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves in the wind made my heart jump. I kept scanning the banks, my eyes straining, half expecting to see it standing there, watching us leave. We got back to the ramp just as the sun was properly rising, casting a beautiful golden light over everything. It felt wrong. The world should have looked different. It should have been grey and grim. But it was just a beautiful Florida morning. I helped them load their gear into their truck. They paid me in cash, the transaction done in complete silence. The older brother just shook my hand, his grip weak, his eyes avoiding mine. They got in their truck and drove away without a backwards glance. I stood there at the ramp for a long time, just staring at the water. The wind was still blowing, that same damn wind that had masked our approach, that had let us get so close. I replayed the whole thing in my head, over and over, the digging, the standing up, the eyes, the way it walked, the silence when it disappeared. I've been back to that sandbank a dozen times since then. I've gone at the same time of day, in the same conditions. I've looked for footprints, for hair snagged on a branch, for any sign at all. There's nothing. It's like it was never there. But I know what I saw. We all saw it. That thing was real, it was solid, and it was powerful, and it was aware of us in a way that nothing in those woods has any right to be. And sometimes, when I'm out there alone and the wind picks up, I get this cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. I stop what I'm doing and I just listen, because I know it's still out there. I know it's watching from the mangroves, and I know that on that one morning, for a few terrifying seconds, the thing in the shadows decided to show itself. Story 3. Okay, so I'm just going to type this out, because I need to get it off my chest, and honestly, I don't know who to talk to about it. People would think I'm crazy, but I swear on everything this happened. I was walking home along the train tracks in Georgia, like I do most days, since it's a shortcut through the woods to my place. It was about an hour before dark, you know, that time when the light starts to get kind of soft and golden, but shadows are stretching long and everything feels a little eerie. I've always been comfortable in the woods, grown up around here, spent my whole life hiking and hunting, so I never really got spooked easily. But that day changed everything. I remember the air was cool for early fall, with that damp smell of leaves and dirt that hangs around after a light rain. The tracks cut through a thick patch of pine and oak trees, and the gravel crunched under my boots in a way that was almost rhythmic. I had my headphones in, listening to some podcast, but I kept the volume low because I like to hear what's around me. Squirrels rustling, birds chirping, the usual stuff. It was just a normal walk, nothing out of the ordinary. I was thinking about what I'd make for dinner, maybe some pasta, and whether I needed to stop by the store. My mind was wandering. You know how it does when you're on autopilot. Then I saw it. Up ahead, maybe a couple 100 yards away, there was this dark spot on the tracks. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from a tree or something. The sun was dipping low, casting long fingers of light through the branches. But as I got closer, maybe 50 yards out, I realized it wasn't moving like a shadow should. Shadows shift with the light. But this thing was solid, just sitting there. I slowed down a bit, pulling one earbud out to listen better. My heart wasn't racing yet, but I felt this little prickle on the back of my neck, like when you sense someone watching you. I kept walking, maybe 20 yards away now, and that's when I saw it clearly. It was an upright figure, straddling one of the rails like it was standing on it, not crouching or anything, just standing tall, with its feet on either side of the track. And it was huge. I mean, the shoulders were so broad they looked almost unnatural, like a football player on steroids, but way bigger. The head, God, the head wasn't human. It was shaped wrong, kind of conical or something. And it was dark, like matted fur or shadow, but solid. I couldn't see any facial features from that distance, just this silhouette against the fading light. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze for a second. I thought maybe it was a bear standing up, but bears don't stand that straight, and their heads are rounder. This thing was leaner in the body, but those shoulders, I've never seen anything like it. I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead, and my hands started to tremble. I remember thinking, okay, just back away slowly. Don't make any sudden moves. I've dealt with wildlife before, once had a coyote follow me for a bit, but this felt different. It wasn't acting like an animal, it was just watching me. I took a step back, my boots scraping on the gravel, and that's when it moved, and holy shit, the way it moved. I still get chills thinking about it. 1 second it was straddling the rail, and the next it was gone. But not like it vanished, more like it exploded into motion. It went from standing still to running up the steep bank on the side of the tracks in what felt like a heartbeat. The bank is maybe 10 feet high, covered in loose dirt and weeds, and it's steep enough that I've slipped climbing it before. But this thing, it covered about 40 feet in 3 running steps. 3 steps. I counted them in my head because it happened so fast, but it felt like a blur. It leaned forward with its head out, like a sprinter coming off the blocks, and its legs, they weren't human legs, they were long and powerful. And it moved with this agility that was just impossible. I've seen deer bolt, seen dogs run, but this was smoother, faster, like it was gliding. There was no struggle, no scrambling, just pure, raw speed. The sound it made was this low, heavy thud, thud, thud as its feet hit the ground. But it was almost silent otherwise, no panting or grunting. It vanished into the trees at the top of the bank in less than 2 seconds, I swear. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my ears. I was breathing in shallow gasps, and my legs felt like jelly. I kept staring at the spot where it disappeared, half expecting it to come back, but nothing happened. The woods went quiet, like dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. It was as if everything had just stopped to watch what was happening. I remember the smell of the damp earth and my own sweat, and the taste of copper in my mouth from biting my lip. I didn't move for a good minute or two, just stood there trying to process what I'd seen. My mind was racing. Was it a person in a costume? No, no way. The speed, the size, it wasn't human. Could it have been a bear? But bears don't run like that, and they don't stand that upright for long. This thing was built different, like it was made for that kind of movement. I thought about Bigfoot stories I'd heard, but I always dismissed them as bullshit. Now, I don't know. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to start walking again, but I was shaking so bad I had to steady myself on the rail. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see it following me, but the woods were just empty. The normal sounds slowly came back. A bird chirped somewhere, the wind rustled the leaves, but it didn't comfort me. Everything felt wrong, like the world had shifted, and I was the only one who noticed. I picked up my pace, almost jogging, and I didn't stop until I got to the edge of the woods where my neighborhood starts. My house is just a 5-minute walk from there, but it felt like miles. I kept glancing behind me, my eyes darting to every shadow, every movement. When I finally got to my door, I fumbled with the keys, my hands still trembling, and slammed it shut behind me. I leaned against it, breathing heavy, and just stood there for a while, listening. Nothing. No sounds from outside. I didn't sleep well that night. Every little noise made me jump. The creak of the house, the wind outside, I kept replaying it in my head, the way it stood there, the broad shoulders, the non-human head, and then that insane speed, the images burned into my brain. I've been in the woods my whole life, seen bears, coyotes, even a panther once, but nothing ever moved like that. Nothing ever felt that intelligent. It wasn't just an animal. It was something else. The next day, I went back to the spot in the daylight, just to see if there were any signs. The tracks were there, but faint, like large, deep footprints in the soft dirt on the bank, but they were messed up from its running, so I couldn't make out a clear shape. No fur, no nothing. I asked around, but no one else had seen anything. Part of me wants to believe it was a trick of the light or my imagination, but I know what I saw. I've never been so scared in my life. Even now, weeks later, I get nervous walking home that way. I take the long route now, through the streets, even though it adds 10 minutes to my walk. I keep looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see it again. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will. But I'll never forget that feeling, the sheer gut-wrenching terror of seeing something that shouldn't exist move in a way that defies everything I know. It's left me shaken, and I don't think I'll ever be the same in the woods again. Story 4. Okay, I need to get this out. I've been carrying this around for what feels like a lifetime, but it's been a little over 2 years now. I've tried to write it in my journals, to explain it to the few people I thought might understand, but the words always get stuck. Maybe typing it out here where nobody knows me will help. My name is Jose Mariano Mozinho. I'm a naturalist. In the spring of 1792, I found myself on a Spanish ship, the Activa, anchored in a place the English call Nootka Sound, on the west coast of this vast, new-to-us land. The air here is different. It's thick, wet, and smells of salt, pine, and something else, something ancient and decaying. The forests don't just sit on the land, they swallow it. They're a solid, dark green wall that seems to go on forever, rising into mist-shrouded mountains. My job was to document everything, the plants, the animals, the people. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. The native people here, the Nucha Nolth, were initially wary of us, but over time, a cautious trust was built. We traded goods, shared meals. I'd sit with the elders, sketching fish and birds, trying to learn their names for things. It was during one of these sessions, maybe a month after we'd arrived, that the mood shifted. I was with a group of men, showing them drawings of European birds. I asked, through our halting mix of their language and gestures, about the larger animals in the great forests. I was thinking of bears, wolves, the sort of creatures we had records of. The conversation didn't just die, it was severed. The easy laughter vanished. One of the older men, a man whose face was a map of deep lines and a life lived hard by the sea, looked at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He said a single word, his voice a low gravel: matlocks. I didn't understand. I asked him to describe it, thinking it was a new species of bear, perhaps a larger predator. What followed wasn't a description, it was a warning, delivered with a fear so palpable it felt like a physical chill in the warm air. They spoke in turns, their voices hushed, their eyes constantly darting towards that dark tree line. Even though we were safely by the shore, they said the matlocks lived deep in the mountainous districts, the places they themselves would never, ever go to hunt or travel. They described them not as animals, but as things, monstrous beings, taller than 2 men, covered not in fur, but in stiff black bristles like a boar's. Their heads were human-like, but wrong, distorted, with jaws that could unhinge and fangs longer and sharper than the biggest bears. Their arms were impossibly long, hanging down past their knees, and they had claws on their fingers and toes that could shred cedar bark like it was parchment. I tried to remain scientific, to rationalize. Perhaps it was a rare primate, a large ape unknown to Europe. I made notes, my hand trembling slightly, but then they told me things that defied any natural history I knew. They said you don't fight a matlock, you don't even see it coming. Their shout, a sound that was neither human nor beast, had a physical force. It could hit a man like a wall, driving him to his knees, paralyzing him with a terror so pure it emptied his mind. And if one were to get close, a single slap from one of those long, powerful arms wouldn't just knock a man down. They said it could break a person, not just break bones, but break them into pieces. They used their hands to show me a quick, brutal smacking motion, and then their fingers splaying out, illustrating a body coming apart. The casual, horrific certainty in that gesture made my stomach turn. For days after that, the name Matlock hung over the village like a fog. I saw it in the way the women kept their children closer to the longhouses after dusk. I saw it in the way hunting parties would return early if their path took them too near the foothills. This wasn't a campfire story to them. It was a fact of life, a dangerous, immutable truth, like the tide or a storm. Their terror was a living thing, and it was starting to infect me. The day it happened was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just made a note about the weather. Overcast, with a persistent drizzle that wasn't quite rain, just a wetness in the air. I'd decided to do some collecting a short way up the inlet, a place where a small, fast-flowing creek met the saltwater. It was an area the villagers said was safe, as it was still well within sight of the water and the main village. I took a small skiff, rowing myself along the rocky shore. The plan was to be gone for a few hours, to gather some of the unique mosses and ferns that grew in the spray zone of the creek. The spot was beautiful in a stark, powerful way. The creek cascaded down a series of black rocks, filling the air with a constant roaring white noise. The forest here came right down to the pebbled beach, a tangled mass of salal, ferns, and towering Sitka spruce. I beached the skiff and set to work, my collecting bag over my shoulder, my knife and trowel in hand. The roar of the waterfall was so loud it was almost peaceful. It drowned out everything else. I'd been there for maybe an hour, absorbed in carefully digging up a particularly interesting fern. When I realized the hair on my arms was standing up, I paused, trowel in hand, and looked around. Nothing. Just the drizzle, the grey sky, the dark trees, and the roar of the water. I shook my head, blaming the damp and my own overactive imagination. Fed by the stories I'd been hearing, I went back to work, but the feeling didn't go away. It grew. It was a creeping sensation, a primal feeling of being watched, not just watched, but studied. I straightened up again, scanning the tree line. The undergrowth was a solid, shadowy wall. I saw nothing. No movement. No birds either, I realized. A few minutes earlier, there had been chirps and calls. Now, there was only the water. My heart started to beat a little faster. I told myself I was being foolish, a naturalist spooked by silence and shadows. I decided to pack up and head back to the ship a little early. I knelt down to put my tools away, my back to the forest. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a sound over the waterfall. It was a sound under it. A sound that cut through the roar like a hot knife through butter. It came from the trees, maybe 50, 60 yards away. It was a deep, guttural click, followed by a low, rumbling growl that didn't sound like any bear, wolf, or cat I had ever heard. It was lower, with a resonance that I felt in my teeth and in the pit of my stomach. It was intelligent. That's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't a mindless animal noise. It was a vocalization with a purpose. I froze. My entire body went rigid. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't dare turn around. The stories flooded back into my mind, vivid and terrifying. The stiff black bristles, the long arms, the slap that could break a man into pieces. Then it happened again, the click growl, but this time it was closer, a lot closer. It was maybe 30 yards away now, just inside the tree line. It had moved, and I hadn't heard a single branch snap, not a single rustle of leaves. Something that big, moving that silently, the impossibility of it sent a fresh wave of ice-cold fear through me. My scientific mind, the part of me that catalogued and reasoned, shut down completely. What was left was the raw, screaming animal instinct to survive. I slowly, so slowly, I felt every individual muscle fiber straining, turned my head to look over my shoulder. I saw nothing but the dark, dripping forest. The ferns were undisturbed. The salal bushes were still, but I knew with a certainty that was as absolute as the ground beneath my feet that something was standing there, just beyond the first row of trees, watching me, my eyes strained, trying to pierce the shadows. And then I saw a patch of darkness that was wrong. It was blacker than the surrounding shadows, a solid, vertical shape that blocked the view of the tree trunks behind it. It was tall, impossibly tall, and as I stared, petrified, I saw the shape move. It wasn't a step. It was a subtle shift in its posture, a rolling of its shoulders. I still couldn't make out any details. No bristles, no fangs, just a massive bipedal silhouette of pure, menacing darkness. A smell hit me then, carried on a slight shift in the breeze. It was a foul, pungent odor, like rot and wet fur and something metallic, like old blood. It was the smell of a predator's den. The smell of the stories. I knew I had to run. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to run. But the stories came back again, the one detail that now felt like a death sentence. Their shout could force a man to the ground. If I ran, would it chase me? If it chased me, would it shout? And if it shouted, would I just fall, paralyzed, waiting for that single shattering slap? My options were a precipice on one side and an abyss on the other. I was crying, I realized. Silent, terrified tears were mixing with the drizzle on my face. My body was trembling so hard I thought my bones would rattle. I had my trowel in my hand. A trowel. Against that. The thing in the shadows shifted again. I heard a soft scraping sound, like a claw dragging over wet wood. It was taking its time. It knew I was trapped. It was playing with me. I don't know what came over me. It wasn't bravery. It was a desperate last-ditch surge of adrenaline. I didn't run towards the boat. That felt like turning my back on death. Instead, I did the only thing my paralyzed mind could think to do. I took a step towards the tree line. I lifted my trowel, this pathetic little gardening tool, and I screamed. It wasn't a word, just a raw, ragged, terrified shriek of defiance. I threw the trowel as hard as I could towards the dark shape. I didn't wait to see if it hit. The moment the trowel left my hand, I spun around and ran for the skiff. I have never moved so fast in my life. The world became a blur of grey rock and green moss. My feet slipped on the wet stones, but I didn't fall. I didn't dare. I expected at any second to feel that concussive shout hit me in the back, to feel my legs give way. I expected to hear the thunder of its footsteps behind me. I reached the skiff and practically threw myself into it, scrambling over the side, my hands fumbling with the oars. I pushed off from the shore with one oar, my movements frantic, panicked. I rowed like a man possessed, my back to the forest, my eyes fixed on the distant masts of the Activa. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was sobbing and rowing, my muscles burning, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape. I didn't stop until the skiff bumped against the hull of our ship. I scrambled up the rope ladder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the rungs. I collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air, soaked in sweat and drizzle and terror. The officers on duty rushed over, asking what was wrong. I just lay there, trembling, unable to form words. Eventually, I managed to stammer something about seeing a large bear, that it had startled me. They laughed, clapped me on the back, told me I needed to get used to the wilderness. I didn't correct them. How could I? I never went back to that creek. I did my work closer to the village after that, always with at least 2 other men, and I never ever let the tree line out of my sight. I left Nootka Sound a few months later when the Activa set sail. I have my specimens, my notes, my sketches, but I also have the memory of that towering shadow, the intelligent guttural click, and the smell of rot and blood. The natives' terror was no longer just a story to me. It was a truth I had felt in my own bones. I never saw its face. I never saw its bristles or its claws, but I know with a certainty that has never faded what was standing in those trees that day, and I know that its silence, after I screamed and threw that trowel, was the most terrifying sound of all, because it meant it had let me go, and I have never understood why. Story 5. All right, I'll just come out and say it. I saw something out there that I can't explain, and I haven't been right since. It was this past Tuesday morning. I'm writing this down because I need to get it out, and maybe someone else has seen something like it. I don't know. I just know I can't keep it to myself anymore. I've been going to this same little lake in South Carolina for years. It's my spot. I don't even really tell people about it because it's so quiet and out of the way. You take this old forestry service road that's more two ruts than a road, and it winds back through this thick pine forest for about a mile before it opens up to this small, kinda oval-shaped lake. The water is dark, stained from the tannins in the trees, and it's always still in the morning. It's my peace. I go there to fish, but really, I go there to just be alone with my thoughts. This Tuesday was like any other. I woke up early before the sun was even up, loaded my little aluminum boat into the back of my truck and drove out there. The air was cool, that damp morning cool that you get in the south, and the mist was still hanging over the water when I got there. I didn't see another soul, which is normal. I launched the boat, just a little 12-footer with a trolling motor, and puttered out to my usual spot near the middle of the lake. The sun was just starting to come up, painting the sky in these soft pinks and oranges, and the water was like glass, perfect fishing conditions. I'd been out there for maybe an hour. The fishing was slow, but I didn't mind. I was just enjoying the quiet, the sound of my line whizzing out on a cast, the gentle plop as the lure hit the water. I was facing the eastern shore, watching the sunlight start to filter through the trees. That's when I first saw the movement. It was just a flicker in my peripheral vision at first, over on the far shoreline. My first thought, my only thought, was a deer. We've got plenty of whitetails around here, and they come down to the water to drink all the time. I actually got a little excited, thinking I might see a nice buck. I slowly reeled in my line so I wouldn't make any noise and just watched, waiting for it to step out into the little clearing by the water's edge. But it wasn't a deer. The figure that stepped out of the tree line was so big, so instantly wrong, that my brain just sort of stuttered. It didn't compute. It was tall. I mean, massively tall. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel like a child. I'd guess it was around 9 feet, easy. It wasn't just lanky either. It was built. Huge, rounded shoulders that sloped down into these incredibly long, thick arms. Its arms hung down past its knees, just swinging slightly as it moved. It was covered, and I mean completely covered, in hair. Not fur like a bear, but long, shaggy, dark, brownish-black hair from the top of its head all the way down to its feet. Its head was what got me the most, though. It was sort of cone-shaped, like a dome, and it sat right on its shoulders. There was no neck that I could see, just this massive upper body and that domed head. It never looked my way, not once. It just came out of the trees and started walking along the shoreline, moving from my left to my right. It walked on 2 legs, perfectly upright. Its strides were long and deliberate, like it had someplace to be, and it was in no hurry to get there. It didn't shuffle or amble. It walked with a purpose, but a calm one. The silence was the most unnerving part. You'd think something that big, walking on a shore with leaves and twigs, would make a racket, but it didn't make a single sound. No crunching leaves, no snapping twigs, nothing. It was just this silent, massive thing moving through the quiet morning. I was frozen. I mean, my whole body just locked up. I wasn't even breathing. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a hard, frantic thumping that felt like it was going to break a bone. My hands were clenched so tight on the edge of my boat that my knuckles were white. I could feel the cold, damp aluminum under my fingers, a sharp, real sensation that was the only thing anchoring me. My mouth was dry as dust. I just stared. I couldn't look away. It was maybe 100 yards away from me, across the water. The sun was a little higher now, and I could see the details clearly, the way the muscles in its back and shoulders moved under that thick coat of hair, the sheer bulk of it. It was heavy, solid. It wasn't some skinny, stretched-out ghost. This thing had weight. It had presence. It walked along the shore for what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Later, I'd pieced together that it was probably only about 30 seconds, but in that half-minute, my entire understanding of the world just cracked open. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk like that. They don't have that posture. This wasn't a man in a suit. The proportions were all wrong. The way it moved was all wrong. It was too fluid, too powerful. The most chilling part, the thing that still keeps me up at night, was that it never acknowledged me. It never paused, never turned its head, never even seemed to glance in my direction. I was in a bright blue boat out in the open water. It had to have seen me, but it acted like I wasn't even there, like I was a rock or a stump. It was just going about its business, and I was utterly insignificant. That was more terrifying than if it had roared at me, the complete and total indifference. It made me feel like prey, like something so far beneath its notice that I wasn't even worth a second look. And then, just as calmly as it had appeared, it reached a point where the trees came down close to the water again, and it stepped back into the woods. It didn't push through the brush or duck under branches. It just merged with the shadows between the trees and was gone. Vanished. The silence that rushed back in was heavier than before. The lake was still glassy. The sun was a little brighter. A bird started chirping somewhere. It was like the world had been on pause and someone had just hit play again. But everything was different. I didn't move. I sat in that boat for I don't know how long, just staring at the spot where it had disappeared. My body was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started in my hands and ran all the way through me. I felt cold, a deep, internal cold that had nothing to do with the morning air. I could still smell the lake, the pine, my own sweat. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. My mind was racing, trying to find a box to put this thing in. A bear? No. A person? Absolutely not. I kept running through every animal I knew, every logical explanation, and nothing fit. Nothing even came close. The image of it was burned into the back of my eyelids, that domed head, those long, swinging arms, the sheer, silent power of its walk. After a while, I'm not sure how long, I forced myself to move. My joints were stiff. I picked up my fishing rod with a hand that was still shaking and made a cast. It was a stupid, automatic gesture. I wasn't even thinking about fishing. I just needed to do something normal. I reeled the lure back in, my eyes never leaving that far shoreline. I stayed out on the water for another hour, just sitting there, watching. Nothing happened. No more movement, no sounds. It was just a lake again, a normal, quiet lake. But the normal felt like a lie. It felt like a painted backdrop, hiding something immense and unknown just behind it. Finally, I started the trolling motor and headed back to the dock. The whole time, my back felt exposed. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see it standing on the shore, watching me leave, but there was nothing. Loading the boat back onto my truck was a surreal experience. My hands were still unsteady, fumbling with the straps. The sounds of the truck door closing, the engine starting. They all seemed too loud, too intrusive. I drove down that rutted road faster than I should have, the truck bouncing and jostling. I kept checking my rear-view mirror, but all I saw was an empty road and a wall of green trees. I got home and I didn't know what to do. I put my gear away. I took a shower. I tried to eat some lunch, but I couldn't shake the feeling. It's been days now, and I still can't. It's this low-grade hum of unease that's always there, just under my skin. The world looks the same, but it isn't. I know it isn't, because I know that thing is out there. I saw it. I saw how it moved, how it owned that space. I wasn't scared of it attacking me. I was scared of what it was. I am scared of what it means. I keep going over it in my head, every single detail, the way the light hit its hair, the absence of any sound, the way it just left. I can't explain it, I can't rationalize it. All I have is this memory, this perfect, terrifyingly clear image that I know, with a certainty I feel in my bones, was real. I went back to the lake yesterday just to sit in my truck at the entrance to the service road. I didn't even get out. I just looked down that tunnel of trees toward the water. It looked peaceful. It looked exactly like it always has. But I couldn't make myself drive down there. I just sat there for 20 minutes and then turned around and went home. I don't know if I'll ever go back. That place was my sanctuary, my little piece of quiet. Now it's just the place where I saw something I was never supposed to see, where the woods got deep in a way I never understood before, and I have no one to tell who would really get it. So I'm telling you, I was just fishing, and then I wasn't, and now I don't know what to think about anything anymore. Story 6. Okay, I'll try to write this. I don't know if anyone will believe me, and honestly, I don't even care anymore. I just need to get it out. I need to type this up and put it somewhere because it's been stuck in my head for years now, playing over and over, and I can't shake it. It's the kind of thing you don't talk about at the bar or with your buddies, because they'll just look at you like you're crazy. But it happened. I swear on my life it happened. I was a record driver back then, living in Malta, Montana. It's a small town, you know, the kind where everyone knows everyone and not much happens. Most of my calls were for folks who'd slid off the road in the winter or had a breakdown. Routine stuff. But this one call, this one was different. It was late. Real late. My pager went off sometime around 11:30, maybe creeping towards midnight. The dispatcher's voice was crackly, telling me there was a single vehicle accident out on Highway 2, east of town. Car hit an elk. State Patrol was on scene. I groaned and rolled out of bed. The cold hit me the second I opened my front door. It wasn't just winter cold. It was that deep, biting Montana cold that gets into your bones and doesn't leave. The kind of cold where the air itself feels sharp and dangerous. The thermometer on my porch read 40 below. You don't mess around with that. You cover every inch of skin or you lose it. I got the big wrecker fired up, letting it groan and rumble for a good 10 minutes while I bundled up in my thickest coveralls, my heavy boots, my face mask, the whole works. The drive out was dead. No other cars, just me. The high beams cutting a tunnel through the blackness and the endless white on either side. The snowbanks were piled up high from plows, and beyond them it was just flat, frozen fields and darkness. The kind of empty that makes you feel small. I saw the state troopers' lights first, flashing blue and red against the snow, way up ahead. As I got closer, I saw the scene. A sedan, a little Ford Focus or something like that, was crunched up against the snowbank on the right side of the road. The front end was smashed in, windshield webbed with cracks. The driver was already gone, probably taken to the hospital by another unit. And right there in the middle of the westbound lane was the elk. It was a young bull, not a huge trophy animal, but still big. Probably 300 pounds of dead weight. Its neck was bent at a bad angle, and its eyes were already glazed over, reflecting the troopers' lights. There was a little dark blood on the snow around its head. The trooper, a guy I knew vaguely, gave me a tired wave. His name was Mike. He had his big parka on, his hat pulled down low. "About time," he said, his voice muffled by his scarf. "Help me get this thing off the road before someone else hits it." So that's what we did. We each grabbed a leg. God, it was heavy. The fur was coarse and stiff, and the body was already freezing solid in that insane cold. Our breath was pouring out in thick clouds, freezing on our face masks. We grunted and strained, sliding it more than lifting it, dragging it off the asphalt and into the deep snow on the shoulder. We got it about 10 feet off the road, into a ditch that was filled with snow. We were both breathing hard, the air scraping in our lungs. "All right," Mike said, patting my shoulder. "I'll finish the report. You get the car loaded." I nodded and trudged back to my wrecker. My boots crunched in the snow, a sound that usually seems quiet, but in that absolute silence felt incredibly loud. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No wind, nothing, just the low hum of the wrecker's engine and the faint crackle of the trooper's radio from his car. I got in the cab, the warmth a relief for about 2 seconds before I had to open the door again to get out and set up the rig. I backed the wrecker up, the beep, beep, beep of the backup alarm sounding obnoxiously loud in the stillness. I got it positioned behind the wrecked Ford. I hopped out again, the cold immediately seeping back through my clothes. I started unhooking the chains, getting the boom ready. It was all muscle memory. I'd done this 1,000 times. I was bent over, my back to the ditch where we'd left the elk, connecting the hook to the car's frame. My head was down, I was focused on my work, my gloves making my fingers clumsy, and that's when I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound, but in that silence it was like a gunshot, a deep, guttural grunt. It came from behind me, from the ditch. It was low, like a sound a big hog would make, but deeper, much deeper. It was a sound that had weight to it, a sound that came from a chest bigger than any man's. My whole body went rigid. Every hair on my arms, on the back of my neck, stood straight up. I slowly, so slowly straightened up. I turned around. My flashlight was on the bumper of the wrecker, pointing at the ground. I fumbled for it, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I finally got my hand around it and swung the beam towards the ditch. The elk was gone. Not just gone. There was a deep, wide trench leading from the road into the deeper snow of the ditch, like something huge had just plowed through it. I followed the trench with my flashlight beam, my hand shaking so bad the light jittered all over the place, and that's when I saw it. About 50 feet away, at the edge of the tree line where the fields gave way to a small patch of scrubby pines, was the thing. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing towered over me. I'd guess it was 8 feet tall. Easy. It was built like a bodybuilder, but not in a pretty gym rat way. This was raw, powerful strength. Massive, rounded shoulders that sloped down into arms that were way too long, hanging down past its knees. Its whole body was covered in hair. Not fur, but hair. It was a messy, matted brown color with patches of grayish silver, especially around its chest and face. The hair looked about 2 inches long, shaggy. It was dragging the elk with one hand. It had a grip on the elk's antlers, and it was just walking, dragging this 300-pound dead weight through snow that was 3 feet deep like it was nothing, like it was pulling a kid's toy wagon. My brain just short-circuited. I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was impossible. Then it stopped. It just stopped walking and turned its head, and it looked right at me. The flashlight beam caught its face. It was flatter than a man's face and wider with a heavy brow ridge. And it had a beard, a real proper beard of that same shaggy brown and grey hair. But the eyes, that's what I'll never forget. They reflected my flashlight beam back at me, but it wasn't the bright red eyeshine of a deer or a coyote. It was a dull, whitish glow like old bone, and they were set wide apart, maybe 5 inches from each other, just staring right into the light, right into me. It didn't snarl. It didn't huff. It didn't seem scared or angry. It just looked. Its expression was calm. Totally calm. It assessed me for a second, this creature from a nightmare, and it just seemed to dismiss me, like I was a gnat, a minor inconvenience. Then it turned its head back, gave a slight tug on the elk, and kept walking. It moved through that 3-foot-deep snow like it was nothing. It didn't struggle. It didn't break stride. It just dragged its prize, this huge, dead animal, with an effortless, powerful gait, and disappeared into the dark tree line. The whole thing, from the grunt to it vanishing, couldn't have been more than 15 seconds, maybe 20. I stood there, frozen in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. My feet were rooted to the spot. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just stared at the empty space where it had been, at the huge trench in the snow leading into the woods. The sound of the trooper's car door opening snapped me out of it. Mike walked over, stomping his feet. "You get it hooked up?" he asked. I couldn't speak. I just pointed a trembling finger towards the trees. He followed my gaze, saw the massive trail in the snow. "What the hell? Where's the elk?" I finally found my voice, but it was a thin, reedy thing, a stranger's voice. Something took it. "A wolf? A bear? No bears out this time of year," he said, peering into the darkness. "It wasn't a bear," I whispered. "It was a man." But it wasn't a man. It was huge. It had hair all over. It just looked at me, and it dragged the elk away with one hand. Mike turned and looked at me. really looked at me. He shined his own flashlight on my face, and I must have looked as terrified as I felt, because his expression changed from confusion to concern. "Whoa, buddy. You okay? You're white as a sheet. It's the cold. It plays tricks on you. You were out here too long. You're seeing things." "I'm not seeing things," I said, my voice rising. "I saw it. It was right there." All right, he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Let's just get this car loaded and get out of here. You can sit in my car and warm up for a minute." He didn't believe me, not a word. He thought I had hypothermia, that my mind was playing tricks. I could see it in his eyes. He helped me hook up the car, his movements efficient and practiced while I fumbled, my hands still shaking. My mind was 1,000 miles away, back in those 15 seconds. We got the car secured. I got into the passenger seat of his warm patrol car. The heat felt like a furnace, but it didn't touch the cold that had settled deep inside me. "You good to drive?" Mike asked. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Must have been a mountain lion," he said, more to himself than to me. "A big one. Dragged it off. The shadows can do weird things." I didn't argue. What was the point? I'd seen what I'd seen. A mountain lion doesn't walk on two legs. A mountain lion isn't 8 feet tall with a flat face and a beard and wide-set eyes that glow white. I drove back to the yard in a complete daze. I dropped the wrecked car off, did the paperwork on autopilot, and went home. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my living room in the dark, staring at the wall. It's the calmness that gets me. That's the part that has stuck with me all these years, the part that still wakes me up sometimes. The sheer, terrifying strength to drag a full-grown elk one-handed through deep snow without even straining, and the way it looked at me. There was no malice, no curiosity even. It was just a look, a simple, neutral observation. I was less than nothing to it. An insect. The complete and total lack of fear. The absolute dominance. It knew it was the strongest thing out there, and it had no reason to be concerned about me, my truck, or the trooper's car with its flashing lights. I've tried to rationalize it. I've read about bears on their hind legs, about people in furs, about hallucinations from the cold, but none of it fits. None of it explains the sheer physicality of it, the way it moved, the proportions of its body, the width between its eyes, the texture of its hair. I saw it in perfect, horrifying detail for 15 seconds in the beam of my flashlight. I never went back to that spot in the dark. I took different routes for years. I quit the wrecker job not long after. I couldn't handle the late-night calls anymore. The fear never really left. It just settled into a low, constant hum in the back of my mind. I saw something out there that night, in the freezing dark of a Montana winter. Something that shouldn't exist, and the most terrifying part isn't that it was big and strong. The most terrifying part is that it saw me, and it just didn't care. Story 7. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing about work, about money, about all the usual nonsense that keeps a person awake. So I did what I always do when that happens. I got out of bed, pulled on a hoodie over my t-shirt, and shuffled out to the back deck for a smoke. The deck is nothing fancy, just pressure-treated wood, a bit warped in places, with a single set of stairs leading down to a dirt path that disappears into the trees. There's no railing light. I've been meaning to install one for years, but you know how it is. You just never get around to it. So it was dark. Not pitch black, because the moon was out. A thin sliver that cast just enough weak, silvery light to turn the world into shades of grey and black. You could see the shapes of things, but not the details. I lit my cigarette. The flame from the lighter, a sudden shocking flare in the darkness that left spots in my eyes. I leaned my forearms on the top railing of the deck, the wood cool and slightly damp under my skin. I took a long drag, holding the smoke in my lungs before letting it out in a slow stream, watching it vanish into the night. Everything was quiet. Not silent, but the normal quiet of the woods. The rustle of some small creature in the underbrush far off, the sigh of the wind moving through the highest branches of the cedars. It was peaceful. I remember feeling the tension in my shoulders start to ease just a little. I was just standing there, maybe halfway through my cigarette, my thoughts starting to finally blur and slow down, when I felt it. It's hard to describe the feeling of being watched. It's not a sound. It's not something you see. It's a primal thing, a pressure on the back of your neck, a sudden, instinctual awareness that you are no longer the observer, but the observed. Every hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. A cold trickle, totally separate from the night air, ran down my spine. I froze mid-exhale. My body went rigid. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to know. My heart, which had been beating a slow, tired rhythm, suddenly kicked into a frantic pounding drum against my ribs. It was so loud in my ears I was sure it was the only sound in the world, but I had to look. I had to. I turned my head slowly, so slowly, my neck muscles tight with a fear I hadn't felt since I was a child, afraid of the dark. It was standing there, right there, on the deck with me, not 5 feet away. My brain short-circuited. It just stopped processing. It couldn't fit what I was seeing into any category I understood. It was tall, so goddamn tall, 7 feet at least, maybe more. It was just a massive vertical shape, broader than any man I'd ever seen, and it was covered in hair, not fur like a bear. Hair, long, shaggy, dark brown or black hair that looked matted in places. It was just standing there, perfectly still, and it was looking right at me, but its face is what my mind keeps coming back to, what I see when I close my eyes even now. It wasn't a human face, and it wasn't an animal's face, not like a bear or a gorilla. It was something else entirely. The eyes were the worst part. They were set deep under a heavy, bony brow, and they were dark, but they caught the tiny bit of moonlight and reflected it back with a faint, dull shine like wet stones. There was no white to them, just dark, intelligent pools. Below that, the face seemed to push forward into a sort of muzzle, but it was flat, not protruding like a dog's. There was no distinct nose, just shadows where a nose should be, and its mouth, I don't even know if it had lips. It was just a dark line in the middle of all that hair. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My hand, the one holding the cigarette, was still resting on the railing, and I felt my fingers clamp down on the wood so hard, I'm surprised I didn't splinter it. My knuckles were white. I could feel every single muscle in my body locked up, tensed for a fight or a flight that was impossible. I was trapped. The only way off the deck was the set of stairs, and it was standing between me and those stairs. The thought screamed in my head. It's between me and the door. That's when the smell hit me. It washed over the deck in an almost physical wave. It was a thick, heavy, musky odor. It smelled like wet dog, but 100 times stronger, mixed with the deep, rotten scent of old soil and something else, something foul, like decaying meat. It was so potent, it made my eyes water and my stomach clench. That smell made it real. This wasn't a shadow. This wasn't my imagination. This was a living, breathing thing standing right in front of me, and it stank of the deep, wild woods. The terror in that moment wasn't just about its size or its appearance. It was the silence. The deck is old. The boards creak if you so much as shift your weight. I'd heard every single one of my own footsteps when I walked out here, but this thing, this massive, heavy-looking creature, had walked right up onto the deck, right up behind me, and I hadn't heard a goddamn thing. Not a snap of a twig from the path, not a single groan from the wood. It had moved with a silence that was utterly unnatural. It could have been standing there watching me for a minute, for 5 minutes, and I would have never known. And the next, even more terrifying thought, it could reach me in an instant. 5 feet, that's nothing. 1 step, 1 lunge, and it would be on me. I was staring right at it, and I could see the sheer power in its shoulders, in its thick arms that hung down past its knees. I felt like a rabbit caught in the open, completely and utterly helpless. My life wasn't mine in that moment. It was entirely up to this thing, whatever it was, to decide if I lived or died. We stood like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few seconds. It was just me, frozen in sheer panic, and it, motionless, those dark eyes fixed on me. I was waiting for it to charge. I was waiting for it to make a sound. I was waiting for my life to end on that stupid dark deck. Then it moved. It didn't look away from me. It just turned. It turned its whole body, not just its head, with a slow, deliberate grace that was terrifying in something so huge. I saw the muscles in its back and shoulders shift under the thick mantle of hair, and then it stepped off the deck. It didn't jump. It didn't run. It took a single heavy step off the side of the deck, down into the soft earth below, and that's when the noise finally came. As its weight left the deck, the old boards, relieved of the immense pressure, let out a loud, sharp groan. Creak! The sound was so normal, so mundane, that it was somehow the most frightening part of the whole thing. It was a sound I heard every day, but now it was the sound of this thing leaving. It didn't look back. It just walked, with that same impossible silence, into the tree line. It didn't push branches aside. It seemed to just melt between the trunks, its dark form swallowed by the deeper darkness of the forest in what seemed like 2, maybe 3 strides, and then it was gone. Just like that, I stayed frozen for another full minute, maybe more. My lungs were burning, and I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time. I sucked in a ragged, shaky gulp of air that sounded deafening in the sudden quiet. The musky smell was still there, clinging to the air, making me feel sick. My whole body started to tremble. It started in my hands, a violent shaking that made me drop my cigarette, which I'd somehow managed to hold on to through the whole thing. The ember hit the deck, and I stomped on it automatically, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. Then the shaking moved up my arms, into my core. My legs felt like water. I had to grip the railing with both hands to stay upright. I stared into the spot where it had disappeared. My eyes scanned the tree line, trying to pierce the darkness, looking for any movement, any sign. But there was nothing. Just the normal, peaceful woods, the rustling, the wind, as if nothing had happened, but something had happened. I finally forced my legs to move. I stumbled backwards, never taking my eyes off the forest, until my back hit the wall of the cabin next to the sliding glass door. I fumbled behind me for the handle, my hand slick with sweat, my heart still hammering. I yanked the door open, fell inside, and slammed it shut, twisting the lock with frantic fingers. I stood there, panting, my back against the door, staring out through the glass at my empty deck. Did I just see that? Did I imagine it? The smell was still in my nose. The image of its face was burned onto the back of my eyelids. The memory of the deck groaning under its weight was a physical sound I could still hear, but it was impossible. Things like that don't exist. They're stories, campfire tales. I spent the rest of the night with every light in the house on, sitting on my couch with a kitchen knife on the coffee table in front of me. I didn't sleep. I just stared out the window, jumping at every normal night sound, my mind replaying those few seconds over and over and over. The next morning, in the clear, grey light of day, I went outside. My hands were still shaking. I walked to the edge of the deck, to the spot where it had stepped off. The ground there was soft from a recent rain, and there, clear as day, was a single footprint. It was huge, long, wider than my 2 hands put together, and deep. It wasn't a bear print. Bears have claws. This was just the shape of a foot, a broad, flat foot. I didn't have a camera. I just stood there and looked at it. A perfect impression in the mud, a piece of evidence that proved I wasn't crazy. A few hours later, a light drizzle started, and by the afternoon, the print was gone, washed away. But I know what I saw. That was a few years ago now. I still live here. I can't afford to move. But I'm not the same person I was that night. I never go outside after dark without a high-powered flashlight. its beam cutting a frantic path through the darkness. I never just stand on the deck. I'm always moving, always looking, always listening, and I always glance at that corner of the deck, the spot where it stood. Every single time. My eyes are just drawn to it. I saw something that night that I cannot explain, something that shouldn't exist. And the worst part, the part that still gives me chills, isn't just what I saw. It's the silence, the way it moved without making a sound. It makes me wonder what else is out there in those woods, moving in the darkness, watching from the shadows, that I never, ever hear. Edison, Story 8. The sun was beating down that day, one of those rare, blistering hot afternoons on Vancouver Island where the air doesn't move and the humidity clings to your skin like a wet shirt. I'd finished my work early, some freelance graphic design stuff I could do from home, and the heat in my little cabin was getting oppressive. The only thing that made sense was the river. I've lived out here for about 3 years, just outside of Port Alberni, and this particular spot on the river has always been my sanctuary. It's not an official park or anything, just a bend in the river you get to by a dirt track that's more pothole than road. You have to know it's there. The river widens out, creating a deep, slow-moving channel on one side, perfect for swimming because the current isn't strong enough to pull you away. The opposite bank is just a wall of old-growth forest, so thick and dark it feels like a different world, even in the middle of the day. I parked my beat-up truck in the usual pull-off, the gravel crunching under the tires. The walk down to the water is short but steep, through ferns and salal bushes that were already wilting in the heat. I had my towel and that was it. No phone, no music. I like the quiet out here. It's the whole point. The water was a shock, the way it always is, a cold grip that steals your breath for a second before your body adjusts. I waded out to where it got deep, the rocky bottom giving way to soft silt under my feet, and then I just let myself float on my back. The sky was this perfect, endless blue, framed by the tall cedars and firs on either side of the river. I closed my eyes for a bit, just feeling the cool water support me, listening to the gentle lap of tiny waves against the shore and the distant chatter of a kingfisher. It was perfect. It was peace. I don't know how long I floated like that. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. Time gets fuzzy when you're that relaxed. I remember rolling onto my stomach to do a lazy breaststroke just to keep myself in the middle of the channel, and that's when I first noticed the change. The quiet. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was a dead quiet. The kingfisher was gone. I couldn't hear the usual rustling in the underbrush from squirrels or birds. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over everything. The only noise was the water dripping from my fingertips. That's the first thing that pricked at the back of my neck, this feeling that something was off. You get a sense for that living out here. The forest is never truly silent unless something big is moving through it. I stopped swimming and just treaded water, my head barely above the surface. My heart, which had been slow and lazy, started to pick up its pace. I scanned the opposite bank, my eyes trying to pierce the wall of green and shadow. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees, ferns, fallen logs covered in moss. Then there was a movement. It wasn't a flicker, it wasn't small. It was a solid, deliberate shift in the shadows. And then it stepped out. My brain short-circuited. It just stopped working for a second, refusing to process what my eyes were sending it. It was tall, so damn tall. It had to be at least 8 feet, maybe more. Its body was massive, shoulders hunched and incredibly wide, with arms that hung down past its knees. They were long like a gorilla's, but it was standing upright, fully on 2 legs. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't fur like a bear. It was long, shaggy, and looked matted, a dark, wet-looking brown, almost black in the deep shadows of the trees. It just stood there on the bank, maybe 50 feet away from me, and it was looking right at me. I froze, every muscle in my body locked up. I wasn't even treading water anymore. I was just floating there, suspended, with this cold dread pouring into my stomach. I was completely exposed. In the water I had nothing. No rocks to hide behind, no trees to climb, no weapon. Just me and a pair of swimming trunks in the middle of this river. There was nothing between us, a stretch of water that suddenly felt as wide as a puddle. The terror wasn't just about seeing it, it was the feeling of being seen. Its eyes, I couldn't see the color from that distance, but I could feel them. It was a direct, intelligent stare. It wasn't the blank look of a deer or the curious gaze of a raccoon. This was a calculating look. It was assessing me. I remember my own breathing sounded deafening in the silence, little puffs of air that I was trying to keep quiet. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I was cold, a deep, internal cold that had nothing to do with the river water. My skin was prickling with goosebumps everywhere, and then I saw it move. Not a step, just a slight shift of its weight. And as it did, I saw the muscles in its shoulder and back ripple under that thick, matted hair. It wasn't a costume. It wasn't a trick of the light. The hair moved with the muscle, outlining the powerful shape beneath. That was the moment any last shred of doubt vanished. This was a living, breathing animal, a real physical thing. It was alive and it was right there. We just stayed like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. It was the longest standoff of my life. I was too scared to move, too scared to even blink. I thought if I made any sudden movement, it would charge into the water. I imagined how fast it could cover that distance, how its long arms would power through the current. I was utterly, completely helpless. Then it turned its head, not a quick jerk, but a slow, deliberate turn to look back into the trees it had come from. It was a massive head, kind of conical, sitting on those huge shoulders without much of a neck. It turned back to look at me one last time, and then it simply stepped off the bank and back into the forest. It didn't run, it didn't crash, it just melted into the shadows. But the sound it made as it moved away is something I'll never forget. It wasn't a quiet retreat. There was a series of loud, sharp cracks, like thick, dry branches being snapped in two. Crack, crack, crack. Each one echoed across the water, a brutal punctuation to what had just happened. It was moving through timber that would have stopped a man in his tracks, and it was just walking through it. The spell broke. A jolt of pure, undiluted adrenaline shot through me. I didn't think, I just moved. I spun around in the water and started swimming for my shore. It wasn't a graceful swim. It was a frantic, panicked, splashing dog paddle combined with a freestyle stroke, my arms and legs churning the water white. I wasn't breathing right. I was gasping, sucking in air and water, my lungs burning. All I could think was, get out, get out, get out. I didn't look back. I was too terrified that I'd see it following me, wading into the river. Every second I expected to feel a massive, hairy hand close around my ankle and pull me under. My feet finally hit the rocky bottom near the shore, and I scrambled forward, stumbling, falling to my knees in the shallow water, then getting up and half running, half crawling up the bank. I collapsed onto the gravel of the path, my chest heaving, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I was dripping wet, and the sun on my skin didn't feel warm anymore. It felt like a searchlight. I forced myself to sit up to look back across the river. Nothing. The opposite bank was just a wall of trees again. The forest was still dead quiet. The kingfisher hadn't returned. It was just me, the sound of my own ragged breathing and the gentle, mocking flow of the river. I sat there for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, just staring. My mind was racing, trying to find another explanation. A bear, standing on its hind legs? No, the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the way it moved was too fluid, too human-like, but on a scale that wasn't human. A person in a suit, out here in the middle of nowhere, and the sheer size of it. The way the muscles moved, no, that was no person. It was a Bigfoot. There's no other word for it. I'd heard the stories, read the accounts online, always with a healthy dose of skepticism, but now I knew. I had seen one. The shaking eventually subsided to a fine tremor in my hands. I stood up on legs that felt like rubber, picked up my towel, and walked back to my truck. I didn't run. I just walked, constantly looking over my shoulder, my senses screaming, expecting it to come crashing out of the trees on my side of the river at any moment. I got in the truck, locked the doors, a stupid, pointless gesture that felt necessary, and just sat there for another 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at the path that led to the river. I've never gone back to that spot. I can't. I drive a different way to town now, just to avoid even seeing the turnoff for that dirt track. Sometimes, on a hot day, I'll think about how good the cold river water would feel. But then I remember that silence. I remember the way its muscles moved under its hair. I remember the feeling of being so completely, utterly exposed and watched by something that shouldn't exist. And I stay home. Story 9. It was the summer of 1980, just a few weeks after Mount St. Helens blew its top. I remember that part clearly because the ash had made the sky weird for days, even all the way out in Ohio. It gave everything a sort of grey, dusty filter, like the world was an old photograph. That particular day, a Saturday, my dad had decided we needed to get out of the house. My cousin was staying with us for a couple of weeks, and the three of us went fishing out at Deer Creek. The fishing wasn't even that good. We'd been out since early morning and had a couple of small bass to show for it. Nothing worth bragging about. We were packing up our gear, the sun starting to dip lower, casting long shadows through the trees. The air was getting that cool, damp feel that comes right before evening fully sets in. We were following this narrow dirt path that ran along the creek bank, heading back to where we'd parked the car on the gravel turnout off the main road. I was walking behind my dad, with my cousin bringing up the rear. The path was muddy in spots from recent rains, and my sneakers were caked with it. At one point I had to step off the path for a second to, well, answer nature's call. I ducked behind a thicket of scrub bushes, did my business, and then rejoined them on the path. The second I stepped back onto the packed earth, my cousin made this sound, a kind of choked gag. "Whoa, what is that smell?" he said, his voice tight. I just laughed. I figured I'd stepped in some muck, maybe some rotten vegetation or something. "Relax, it's probably just mud," I told him, wiping my shoe on a patch of grass. But he was insistent, his face all scrunched up. "No, man, that's not mud. It's awful. Like something died and then someone farted on it." It was a crude description, but I caught a whiff of it then too. It was a thick, heavy smell. It wasn't just decay. There was a sharp, sulfuric punch to it, like rotten eggs. It was the kind of smell that feels like it coats the inside of your nose. I shrugged it off again, blaming it on the swampy area near the creek. We kept walking. Then my dad, who was a few paces ahead, just stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't say anything at first. He just froze, his body going completely rigid. He was staring off to the left across the creek at the opposite bank. His fishing rod, which was slung over his shoulder, dipped down like he'd forgotten he was even holding it. My cousin and I stopped behind him. "Dad?" I said. "What is it?" He didn't look at me. He just lifted his hand, his finger pointing, and his voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried this weight that made my stomach clench. "What is that?" We followed his gaze. The opposite bank was steep and thick with trees, mostly pines and some bare skeletal ones that had died and lost their bark. My cousin, trying to break the tension, said, "It's just a dead snag, Uncle Jim, a broken tree." I saw what he meant. There was a tall, vertical shape standing among the trees. It was dark, taller than the undergrowth around it, but as I looked, I realized my cousin was wrong. It wasn't a tree. A dead snag is grey and brittle-looking. This thing was a deep reddish-brown colour, like old rust or dried blood, and it had texture. Then I saw the hair. A breeze blew down the creek, one of those soft summer gusts, and I saw the hair on its upper body move. It wasn't leaves rustling. It was long, shaggy hair shifting in the wind. The shape was visible from the waist up because the bank dipped down where it was standing. It was just there, stooped forward a little, with massive shoulders that sloped down into arms. I couldn't really see clearly. My brain was trying to process it, to file it under log or weird shadow, but it wouldn't fit. The proportions were all wrong for anything natural. It was too thick, too solid. The silence around us became absolute. The usual chirping of birds and buzzing of insects had just vanished. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over the whole valley. The only noise was the gentle gurgle of the creek, and that suddenly sounded deafening. My dad was the one who broke the spell. He took a sharp, hissing breath in, and the words came out of him not as a shout, but as this strained, terrified exhalation. That's Bigfoot. Hearing him say it, my dad, who was a mechanic, a no-nonsense guy who believed in what he could see and fix with his own two hands, made it real. The air went out of my lungs. My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them, and then it moved. It turned its head. It wasn't a slow, casual turn. It was a deliberate, smooth rotation of its entire head on a neck that seemed too thick and powerful to be real, and it looked straight at us. I have never in my entire life felt a fear like that. It wasn't just being scared, it was a primal, gut-level terror that short-circuited my brain. Its face, it was dark, like the rest of it, and I couldn't make out clear features from that distance, maybe 50 yards across the water. But I felt its gaze. It was a weight, a physical pressure. It knew we were there. It was looking right at the three of us, frozen on the path. My dad didn't yell, "Run!" He just spun around, his eyes wide and wild, and shoved me hard in the back. It was all the command we needed. We scrambled. The path was too slow. We went straight up the steep, muddy bank behind us, clawing at roots and clumps of grass with our hands. I wasn't thinking, I was just moving. My fishing rod snagged on a branch and I just let it go, the line snapping without a second thought. I could hear my cousin panting and scrambling right behind me, and my dad was already at the top, reaching back to haul me up the last few feet. We burst out of the tree line into this big open field. It was a soybean field, I think, the plants about knee-high. The car was on the other side, a tiny speck of white in the distance. It felt like 1,000 miles away. We just ran. We ran like our lives depended on it. And in that moment, I truly believed they did. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The fear was a fire in my veins. My legs pumped, my lungs burned, and all I could focus on was the car. My cousin was faster than me, and he pulled ahead. My dad, even though he was older, kept pace right beside me, his breathing ragged. Every second I expected to hear something crashing through the trees behind us, to feel a giant hand close around my neck. That smell, that god-awful rotten egg and death smell, seemed to follow us, clinging to the air. I remember the feel of the soybean plants whipping against my jeans, the thud of our footsteps on the soft earth, the metallic taste of panic in my mouth. I don't know how long it took us to cross that field. It felt like an eternity and a single heartbeat all at once. When we reached the car, my cousin was already yanking on the passenger door handle. My dad fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them in the gravel. I snatched them up, my own hands trembling just as much, and I jammed the key into the lock and twisted. We all piled into the car, a tangle of limbs and terror. My dad got behind the wheel, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. He slammed it into reverse, spitting gravel everywhere, then whipped it around onto the road and stomped on the gas. None of us said a word for the first 5 minutes. We just stared straight ahead, breathing hard, covered in mud and sweat. It was my cousin who broke the silence. He was in the passenger seat and he kept shaking his head. It was a tree. He kept muttering, more to himself than to us. It had to be a tree, a weird-looking tree. I just looked out the window. I didn't have the energy to argue. My whole body was trembling, a fine, constant shake that I couldn't control. I could still see it, the reddish-brown hair moving in the wind, the sheer size of it towering in the shadows, the way it turned its head. That look. My dad didn't say anything either. He just drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. We never went back to that spot. Never. My cousin, to this day, he'll say he's not sure what we saw. He'll talk about tricks of the light and dead trees. He can tell himself that if it makes him sleep better at night. But I know what I saw, and my dad knew. I saw it in his face that day, and in the way he never ever talked about it again. It wasn't a tree. It was a creature, a big, hairy, stooped figure that stood up on that bank and looked right at us. The fear I felt in that moment, that pure animal instinct to run, is something that has never really left me. It's been over 40 years, and sometimes if I catch a certain smell on the wind, or if I'm in the woods and the silence falls just a little too completely, it all comes rushing back, that thing by the creek staring at us, and the three of us, running for our lives. Story 10. It was one of those evenings that sticks in your head for all the wrong reasons. April 26th, 1999. A Monday. I remember because my sister had dropped off my nephew earlier that afternoon, and I was thinking about the week ahead, how I had to get the kids ready for school the next morning. It was just after 7:30. The sun was starting to dip, casting long, deep shadows through the trees out back, but it was still plenty light out. That kind of soft, golden hour light that makes everything feel peaceful. My son, he was 10, and his cousin, who's the same age, were out in the backyard. We live on a few acres in Adams County, right where the yard sort of melts into the woods. The boys had built this rickety treehouse a couple summers back, about 100 feet into the tree line. It was their fortress, their command center. They loved it out there. I was in the kitchen cleaning up from dinner, watching them through the window over the sink. I saw them climb up into the treehouse, heard their faint, happy shouts. Normal kids stuff. Then the shouting changed. It wasn't playful anymore. It was sharp, panicked. I stopped wiping the counter and leaned closer to the screen, trying to see. I saw my son point, and then both of them went absolutely still. The next thing I heard was this sound, a heavy, rustling commotion, like something big was shoving its way through the undergrowth. And then a sharp, cracking noise, like a branch snapping. I saw a tall pine tree, one not too far from their treehouse, start to shake. Not like in the wind. This was violent. It was jerking back and forth, like someone had a hold of the top and was shaking it like a rug. And hanging from a branch, I saw this long, dark thing. It looked like a tail, a really long, ropey tail just swinging. That's when they screamed. I dropped the dish rag and bolted for the back door. By the time I yanked it open, they were already out of the treehouse and running across the lawn full tilt. I've never seen two kids run so fast. Their faces were just sheets of pure white. My son slammed into my legs, gripping me so hard his knuckles were white. His cousin was right behind him. And he wasn't just crying, he was making this awful, guttural, gasping sound, like he couldn't get any air into his lungs. He was trembling so violently I thought he was going to shake apart. I dragged them both inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. I locked the back door and pulled the blinds shut. My wife came running in from the living room, her face a mask of confusion and fear. What happened? What's wrong? For a solid minute, neither of them could speak. They just clung to us, sobbing, their whole bodies shaking. My nephew finally managed to choke out a few words between these ragged, hiccuping breaths. "Monster!" he gasped. "A monster in the woods." My first thought was a bear. We get black bears around here sometimes, or maybe a big dog, something that could have spooked them. I knelt down, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my own hands were trembling. "Okay, guys, just breathe. Slow down. Tell me what you saw. Was it a bear?" My son shook his head violently, his eyes wide and fixed on the closed blinds, like he expected something to come crashing through them. "No, it wasn't a bear. It was standing up." His cousin nodded, wiping snot and tears across his face with a trembling hand. "It jumped out of the tree. It had red eyes, glowing red eyes." We sat them down at the kitchen table. I got them glasses of water, but my nephew's hands were shaking so bad he couldn't hold his. I had to help him. We just let them talk, interrupting as little as possible, just letting the story spill out in these broken, terrified pieces. They said they were in the treehouse, just talking, when they heard the rustling. They looked over and saw the tree shaking. That's when my son saw the long tail. Then my nephew said he saw a shape detach itself from the trunk. It wasn't climbing down, it just dropped. It landed on the ground without a sound, and then it stood up. It was tall, they said, really tall, way taller than a man. It was covered in dark hair, but it wasn't furry like a bear. It was like a thick, shaggy coat. Its arms were way too long, hanging down past its knees, and they ended in hands with long, sharp-looking claws. They both kept emphasizing the feet. They said they weren't right. They were long and narrow, almost like a person's feet, but twisted, and they could see the claws on its toes, too. But the worst part, the part that made my skin go cold, was the face, or what they saw of it. They said it was mostly hidden by shadow and hair, but the eyes, they glowed, a bright piercing red like two hot coals in the dark. It didn't make a sound, no growl, no roar. It just stood there for a second looking right at them, then it ran. It didn't run like a person, all upright and steady. They said it was a loping, powerful gait, its long arms pumping, eating up the ground between them with terrifying speed. It was coming right for the treehouse. That's when they scrambled down the ladder and ran for their lives. They said they could hear it behind them, the heavy thump, thump, thump of its feet hitting the ground, the sound of branches breaking as it plowed through the brush. They didn't look back, they just ran. We questioned them for over an hour, separately and together. Their stories never changed, not a single detail. The long arms, the claws, the wrong feet, the glowing red eyes, the way it jumped from the tree and ran. They were consistent in a way kids just can't be if they're making something up. This was a real, shared, bone-deep terror. My wife and I just looked at each other. What do you even do with that? Call the police and say our kids saw a monster with red eyes? They'd think we were crazy. We put the kids to bed, all of us sleeping in our room that night. I slept with a baseball bat next to the bed. I didn't sleep much. Every little creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, made my heart jump into my throat. I kept picturing it. That tall, dark shape with the glowing eyes, standing at the edge of the woods, watching our house. The next morning, the boys were still pale and quiet. They'd left their backpacks and a couple of toys in the treehouse. There was no way they were going back out there alone. So after breakfast, my wife stayed inside with them, and I grabbed my hunting rifle and went out to get their stuff. The woods were dead quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a morning, but a heavy, watchful silence. The birds weren't singing. I couldn't hear any squirrels chattering. It was eerie. I walked slowly, my finger resting near the trigger guard, scanning every shadow, every cluster of trees. I got to the treehouse. Their stuff was still there, scattered around. I gathered it up as quickly as I could, my back feeling exposed and vulnerable the whole time. That's when I saw it. On the ground, right below where they said the thing had jumped from, the ferns and moss were all trampled down, and in the soft, wet earth there were footprints. They weren't bear tracks, they weren't deer tracks. They were long, way too long, and narrow, and at the front I could see deep, distinct impressions, claw marks. 5 of them. The hair on my arms stood straight up. I got out of there fast, not even bothering to look around anymore. A few days later, I was at the local hardware store picking up some things, and I ran into an older guy named Carl who lives a few miles down the road. We got to talking, and I don't know why, but I brought it up. I didn't give him any details. I just said my boy and his cousin had gotten spooked by something in the woods behind my place. Said they saw some kind of animal. Carl got real quiet. He looked around to make sure no one else was listening, and he leaned in close. "Was it tall?" he asked, his voice low, covered in dark hair, arms hanging down low. My blood ran cold. I just nodded. He told me he'd seen something matching that description about 5 years back, early one morning while he was checking his fences. He saw it cross a clearing about 200 yards away. He said it moved fast, with a strange, loping run. He mentioned the feet, too, said they looked wrong, like a person's feet, but not. And the eyes. He didn't see red, but he said they were dark and set deep, and the way it looked at him froze him in his tracks. Hearing a grown man, a guy I knew to be steady and no-nonsense, describe almost the exact same thing my kids had seen. That was it for me. All the doubt, all the rationalizations I'd been trying to cling to just evaporated. I believed them. I believed every terrified word. I looked at Carl and I just said, "I'm sorry I ever thought you might have been seeing things." He just nodded, like he understood completely. He said, "It's still out there. I know it." We never went to the police. What would we have said? We just made sure the boys never, ever went into those woods alone again. We put up a taller fence. The treehouse just rotted away over the years, a sad skeleton in the trees that no one ever visited again. That day, April 26th, stole something from my son. He used to love the woods. He knew every path, every type of tree. He'd spend hours out there building forts, looking for critters. After that, he wouldn't even go into the backyard after dusk. The woods went from being his playground to being this dark, menacing wall at the edge of our property. It became a bad memory, a place of fear. And me? I look out at those trees every single day. Every time I take the trash out at night or let the dog out, I find myself scanning the tree line. I'm always listening for a sound that doesn't belong, watching for a shadow that moves wrong. I'm a grown man, and I'm scared of the dark in my own backyard, because I know what they saw was real. The footprints proved it. Carl's story confirmed it. It's still out there. Somewhere in those deep, dark Ohio woods, that thing is still lurking, and I don't think I'll ever feel truly safe here again. Story 11. That morning, a Tuesday I think it was, I was almost done. My thermos of coffee was empty. The last stack of papers was getting thin in the passenger seat, and I was just on autopilot, my mind already on my own bed. The headlights of my old Jeep Cherokee cut 2 white tunnels through the absolute black, just me and the sound of the tires on the road. This particular stretch was all cornfields on the right, the stalks tall and dry, whispering against each other in a breeze I couldn't even feel inside the car. On the left was just a wall of pine trees. I was just cruising, maybe going 30, not really looking at anything specific, just following the road, and then my headlights swept across the edge of the cornfield, maybe 50 yards ahead, and I saw it, a figure, walking. My first split-second thought was, what the hell is some guy doing out here at this hour? It was the only logical thing, but the logic shattered almost immediately. This wasn't a man. It was just a shape, a solid black shape, darker than the darkness around it, like it was sucking the light right out of my headlights. It was walking along the tree line that separated the cornfield from the woods, moving with a purpose, a steady, loping stride. It was big, really big. My heart, which had been just ticking along, suddenly kicked into a hammering rhythm against my ribs. I slowed down without even thinking, my foot just coming off the gas. The Jeep coasted, and as I got closer, the headlights lit it up better. That's when the details started to sink in, the details that turned confusion into a cold, hard knot of fear in my gut. It was covered in hair or fur, but it wasn't shaggy like a bear. It looked almost tight to its body. a pitch-black pelt that didn't reflect the light so much as just absorb it. The arms were long, swinging slightly with its gait, and the shoulders were massive, hunched and powerful. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. I remember my brain scrambling, trying to file it under bear. I've seen black bears out here before. This was no bear. Bears don't walk on 2 legs like that, not with that kind of straight-backed, confident stride. A bear on its hind legs is awkward, tentative. This thing moved like it owned the ground it walked on. It was parallel to the road, heading away from me, and for a few seconds, I just watched it. My hands frozen on the wheel, the car still rolling forward. I think I stopped breathing. Then, as if it had felt the weight of my stare, it turned its head. It looked over its shoulder right at me, and I saw its eyes. They weren't just reflective like a deer's or a dog's. They weren't little green dots. They were big, and they were red, a deep, glowing, hellish red, like 2 hot coals burning in the middle of all that absolute blackness. There was no white, no pupil, just 2 points of solid, malevolent red light fixed right on me. Time didn't just slow down, it stopped. That stare felt physical, like a pressure on my skin. It wasn't a curious look, it wasn't the dumb glance of a startled animal. It was an assessment, a cold, intelligent recognition. I was an object in its space, and it was acknowledging me. Then it turned its head back forward and kept walking like I was nothing, like I was an insect. It had already catalogued and dismissed. The sheer normalcy of it just continuing its walk was somehow the most terrifying part. It wasn't scared of me. It wasn't startled by the bright lights or the sound of my engine. It just didn't care. My mind was screaming at me to floor it, to get the hell out of there, but a different, stupider part took over. I needed to see it again. I needed to confirm that my eyes weren't playing some cruel, sleep-deprived trick on me. The road up ahead had a little gravel pull-off, a place where farmers sometimes parked their equipment. I hit the gas, my tires chirping on the pavement, and swung the Jeep into that little area. It was a tight 3-point turn, my heart thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was fumbling, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel, the gravel crunching loudly under the tires. I got the car turned around and pointed back the way I came. I flicked my high beams on. The world in front of me exploded in light, the corn stalks at the edge of the field looking like pale, skeletal soldiers. And it was there. It had stopped walking. It was just standing there, maybe 100 yards away now, at the very edge of the woods. It had turned its whole body to face me. It was just standing, still as a statue. The high beams hit it full on, and that's when I got the full, terrifying picture. The sheer size of it was overwhelming. It was massively built, with a broad chest and those long, muscular arms hanging at its sides. The head was blocky, sitting on a thick neck, and those red eyes were pinned on me, unwavering. The light didn't make it less black. It just defined its shape more clearly, carving this monstrous silhouette out of the night. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Me, sitting in the shaky metal box of my Jeep, and it, this thing, standing in the open, like it was the rightful owner of this land, this darkness, this entire hour of the morning. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears, a high-pitched whine of pure panic. The air in the car felt thick, hard to breathe. I could smell my own cold coffee and the faint, dusty smell of old newspapers, smells that were so familiar and now felt alien and wrong. I remember my knuckles were white, clenched on the steering wheel. I remember the way the dashboard lights cast a faint green glow on my hands. I remember the digital clock on the radio read 4:17. These stupid, insignificant details are burned into my brain right alongside the image of that thing. It didn't make a sound. It didn't growl or roar or beat its chest. Its silence was more threatening than any noise could have been. It just stood there, imposing its presence on me. It was a statement, a challenge, or maybe just a simple, terrifying fact. I am here, and you are in my world. That's when the fear fully broke through the shock. It was a cold, liquid feeling that started in my stomach and flooded out to my fingers and toes, leaving me feeling weak and trembly. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was a primal, gut-level understanding that I was in danger, that I was looking at something I was never meant to see. My body moved before my brain did. My foot slammed down on the gas pedal. The engine roared. The tires spun for a second in the gravel before catching, and the Jeep shot forward onto the blacktop. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. I just stared straight ahead, my eyes glued to the road, driving way too fast for these winding country lanes. Every shadow at the edge of my vision seemed to move. Every clump of trees looked like it was hiding that same black shape. I finished the rest of my route in a complete daze. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd pull up to a mailbox, fumble the paper out of the bag, miss the tube half the time, and then accelerate away, my head on a swivel, constantly checking the tree lines, the fields, the dark spaces between houses. The normal sounds of the night, the crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, now sounded like warnings. The world had become a different place, a thinner, more fragile place. And I had seen what was on the other side. The whole encounter, from the moment I first saw it to when I sped away, couldn't have been more than 25 seconds, half a minute tops, but it rewired something in my head. I've replayed it in my mind 1,000 times since then, that morning and every day after. I've tried to convince myself it was a bear, a person in a weird coat, a trick of the light. But I know what I saw. I know the way it moved, that smooth, powerful walk. I know the intelligence in that red-eyed stare. I know the feeling it gave me, a feeling of being prey, of being insignificant. I didn't just see a strange animal that morning. I disturbed something that was just going about its business in the deep, dark hours when it thinks no one is watching, and for 25 seconds it stopped and decided to watch me back. I've never driven that particular part of my route the same way again. I go faster now. I don't look into the cornfields, and I never ever stop my car. Story 12. Okay, I'll try to write this out. I've never really typed the whole thing up before, but I guess it's time. I still think about it most days, even though it was years ago. It's one of those things that just sticks with you like a stain on your memory that won't scrub out. So, this happened back in late September. I think it was a Thursday afternoon. I'd taken the day off work because the weather was perfect, cool, sunny, not a cloud in the sky, and I wanted to get out to Hamsley Fork. It's this little-known spot in Pennsylvania, not far from where I grew up, but far enough that you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. I've been going there since I was a kid, hunting and hiking with my dad, so I know the area pretty well, or at least I thought I did. That day I'd packed light, my old .22 rifle, a water bottle and a sandwich. I wasn't planning on staying out late, just a few hours to clear my head. Work had been stressing me out, and nothing fixes that like being alone in the woods. I parked my truck off the main gravel road near the trailhead that leads into the state game lands. From there I hiked about an hour in, following an old deer road that cuts through dense stands of oak and hemlock until it opens up into this grassy clearing. It's a beautiful spot, ringed by trees with a small stream trickling through one side. I sat there for a while, just listening to the water and the birds, feeling the sun on my face. Everything was peaceful, normal. I started heading back around 3 in the afternoon. The light was still good, but I knew it would start getting dim soon under the thick canopy. The deer road I was on is narrow, maybe 3 feet wide in places, worn down by animals over the years. It's not a maintained trail, just a path that deer and maybe the occasional hunter use. The woods were quiet, the way they get in the fall, just the crunch of my boots on dried leaves and the occasional scurry of a squirrel. That's when I first felt it, this sensation like a pressure fixing on me. It's hard to describe, but it was this distinct feeling of being watched. Not like when a deer might be staring at you from the bushes, but something more intense. It was a heavy, prickling feeling on the back of my neck, like someone was standing right behind me, breathing down my shirt. I stopped walking and looked around, but I didn't see anything. Just trees, shadows, the usual stuff. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the woods playing tricks on me. I've spent enough time out there to know that sometimes your mind can get jumpy when you're alone. So I shook it off and kept walking. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. My skin was crawling, and I had this urge to look over my shoulder every few steps. I started walking faster, my grip tightening on the .22. It's not a powerful gun, really just for small game, but having it in my hands made me feel a little better. Or it did, until the smell hit me. I was upwind, so it made no sense. The air was coming from behind me, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine, and then suddenly, bam! This wave of odor rolled over me. It was sharp and overwhelming, like a mix of body odor and wet dog, but stronger than any animal I'd ever smelled. It was rancid, almost metallic, like something had rolled in rot and sweat. I gagged a little, my eyes watering. I've come across bear scent before, and this wasn't it. Bears smell musky, but this was different, more human, in a sickening way. It clung to the air, thick and foul, and I knew right then that something was very wrong. My heart started thumping hard in my chest, like it was trying to punch its way out. I froze, scanning the trees around me. That's when I saw movement in my peripheral vision, off to my left, maybe 50 yards away in the tree line. At first I thought it was a deer, or maybe a bear, but it was too big and dark. It was a large, dark figure, moving parallel to me, keeping pace. I didn't get a clear look. It was mostly just a shape, glimpsed between the trunks, but it was huge, bigger than any black bear I've ever seen, and I've seen plenty. It was upright, moving on 2 legs, but fast, like it was loping along without any effort. Then the sounds started, loud crashing noises, like it was trampling through the undergrowth without caring who heard it. Branches snapping, leaves rustling violently. It wasn't trying to be quiet. That's what scared me the most, I think. Most animals in the woods, they're stealthy. They don't want to be heard. This thing was making a racket, like it didn't care if I knew it was there. Or maybe it wanted me to know. I picked up my pace, my breath coming in short gasps. The deer road was rough, with roots and rocks trying to trip me up, but I kept my eyes forward, trying not to look directly at the thing in the trees. Every time I glanced sideways, I could see it moving, a dark blur keeping perfect pace with me. It was like it was herding me, or just following me out of curiosity, but it felt aggressive, not curious. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what it could be. A bear? No, bears don't walk like that, and they sure as hell don't smell like that, and they don't crash through the woods like a bulldozer. This was something else. The terror really peaked when I realized it was matching my speed exactly. If I slowed down, it slowed down. If I sped up, it did too. It was playing with me, or maybe studying me. I felt like prey, and I've never felt that way in the woods before, not even when I've stumbled across a coyote or a bobcat. This was different. This was primal fear, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes your hands shake. I could feel the sweat soaking through my shirt, cold and clammy, even though I was moving fast. My mouth was dry, and I kept licking my lips, tasting the fear like something bitter. I thought about stopping, maybe taking a shot with the .22, but what good would that do? It was too far away, and the rifle wouldn't do much more than piss it off. And the light was fading fast. The sun was dipping below the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me. The woods were getting darker, and I knew if I didn't get out soon, I'd be stuck out there in the dark with that thing. The remote, thick terrain made me feel vulnerable, like the trees were closing in. I've never felt claustrophobic in the woods before, but I did then. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every sound made me jump. I started half jogging, my boots pounding on the path. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was too afraid of what I might see. The crashing sounds kept up, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there. That smell followed me too, wafting in and out like a ghost. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, a frantic drumbeat pushing me forward. My legs were burning and my lungs felt tight, but I didn't stop. I just kept telling myself, "Get to the truck, get to the truck." It was the only thing that mattered. At one point, the deer road curved and I had to cross a small stream. I slipped on a wet rock and almost fell, my rifle clattering against a tree. For a second, the crashing stopped. Everything went quiet. Too quiet. The birds had stopped singing. The squirrels were gone. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I scrambled up, my hands scraped and muddy, and I didn't wait to see why it had stopped. I just ran. I ran like hell, not caring about the branches whipping my face or the rocks twisting under my feet. I could hear it start up again behind me, louder this time, like it was closing in. I don't know how long I ran, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20, but it felt like hours. My throat was raw, and I was gasping for air. Finally, I saw the break in the trees up ahead, the spot where the deer road meets the wider trail that leads back to the road. I burst out into the open, the sudden sunlight blinding me for a second. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the door open. I threw my rifle on the passenger seat, jumped in and locked the doors. I sat there for a minute just breathing, my whole body trembling. I looked back at the tree line, half expecting to see it standing there watching me. But there was nothing. Just the quiet woods, looking as normal as ever. I started the engine and peeled out, gravel flying. I didn't look back again. I drove straight home, my mind racing the whole way. When I got there, I took a long shower, trying to wash off the smell and the fear, but it felt like it was stuck to me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark figure moving in the trees, heard those crashing sounds. I've never gone back to Hamsley Fork. I told a couple of people about it, but they just shrugged it off. Probably a bear, they said, or my imagination. But I know what I saw, what I felt. It wasn't a bear. It was something else, something big and unknown. And it was right there with me in those woods. I still have the .22, but I haven't taken it out hunting since. Sometimes when I'm in the woods near my house, I get that same feeling of being watched, and I have to leave. It's like that day left a mark on me, and I can't shake it. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. I'm just glad I got out when I did those and... Story 13. I've never been able to shake this feeling, not even after all these years. I was just a kid, 14 years old, back in the summer of 1964. My family had this old cabin way up in Cottonwood Canyon, Utah, a place that felt like it was miles from anything else. My friend and I had been dropped off there for a week, and at first it was all about the freedom. No parents, no rules, just us and the woods. But that all changed one day, and I still get chills thinking about it. It started that morning. We woke up early, the sun already heating up the canyon, and decided to explore a bit before it got too hot. As we were walking around the cabin, I noticed something weird right away. Deer tracks, lots of them, all heading down the canyon toward the lower areas. That was strange because in the middle of summer, deer usually stick to the higher, cooler spots where there's more shade and water. I remember pointing it out to my friend, and he just shrugged it off, but I couldn't let it go. Then I saw the cougar tracks mixed in with them, big clear paw prints in the dry dirt. That's when it hit me. Something was pushing those deer down, probably hunting them. I felt this knot tighten in my stomach, but I tried to play it cool. We were just kids after all, and cougars were something we knew about, even if we'd never seen one up close. Later that day, we decided to hike out toward Big Cottonwood Highway to check some fishing lines we'd set up in a creek nearby. We figured it'd be a quick trip, maybe a couple of hours tops. But you know how it is when you're that age. Time just slips away. We got distracted, messing around, skipping stones, and before we knew it, the sun was dipping behind the mountains. The sky went from orange to purple to black real fast, and suddenly we were walking back in pitch darkness. No flashlight, just the faint glow of the stars above and the trees blocking most of that out. The air got cold, and I could feel the dampness seeping into my clothes. Every little sound seemed amplified. The crunch of our shoes on the gravel, the rustle of leaves, even our own breathing. That's when the uneasiness really set in. I've always been pretty level-headed, but something felt off. I told my friend to stop for a second, and we both stood there listening. At first, it was just the usual night noises. Crickets, maybe an owl hooting in the distance. But then I heard it, a crunching sound coming from the slope above us, like someone or something was walking parallel to our path. It wasn't random. It mimicked our movements. When we stepped, it stepped. When we paused, it paused. My heart started hammering in my chest, and I could see my friend's eyes widen in the dim light. He whispered, "What is that?" But I didn't have an answer. We both thought it might be a cougar or a bear, something that could explain the tracks from earlier. I remember bending down and grabbing a couple of rocks from the ground. They were rough and heavy in my hands, and I clutched them tight, my knuckles turning white. My friend did the same, and we started walking faster, trying to keep quiet but feeling the urge to run. The sound from above kept pace with us, and with every step it felt like it was getting closer. The air grew thicker, and I could smell the pine and dirt mixing with my own sweat. My throat was dry, and I kept swallowing, trying to steady myself. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, this deep, low growl cut through the silence. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard, not a bear's rumble or a cougar's snarl. This was different, darker, like it came from something much bigger. It vibrated through the ground and up my legs, making my bones feel like jelly. For a second I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my blood running cold. My friend let out a gasp, and that broke the spell. We didn't even look at each other, we just took off running. We bolted down the trail, stumbling over roots and rocks. I remember the burn in my lungs as I sucked in air, my legs aching with every stride. At one point, we dropped into a gully, a steep dip in the land that we had to scramble through. I fell, scraping my knees on the sharp stones, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting back to the cabin. We could see the faint outline of it up ahead, a dark shape against the trees, and we pushed harder, our footsteps echoing in the night. When we finally reached the door, I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in. We burst inside, slamming the door shut and locking it behind us. For a moment, we just stood there, panting, leaning against the wall. The cabin was dark and quiet, smelling of wood smoke and old blankets. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, and my friend was breathing heavy beside me. We didn't say anything. We just listened. Then, seconds later, there was this loud slam from outside, the outhouse door swinging shut. It wasn't the wind. There was no wind that night. It was a sharp, definitive sound, like someone had thrown it closed. We both jumped, and I felt a fresh wave of terror wash over me. My friend whispered, "What was that?" But I just shook my head, too scared to speak. We crept over to the window and peered out, but it was too dark to see anything. I remember my hands were still clutching those rocks, and I had to force myself to let them go. After a minute, I gathered enough courage to turn on the outside light. The bulb flickered to life, casting a weak yellow glow over the yard. We scanned the area, but there was nothing. No movement, no shadows, just the outhouse door swaying slightly on its hinges. The silence felt heavier than before, like the woods were holding their breath. We stayed by the window for what felt like hours, but nothing else happened. Eventually, we moved away, but neither of us could sleep. We just sat on the floor, backs against the door, listening for any sound. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and exhaustion. Every creak of the cabin made us jump, and I kept imagining things outside the windows. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps circling the cabin, but it might have been my imagination running wild. My friend eventually dozed off, but I stayed awake, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. The growl echoed in my mind over and over, and I knew deep down that whatever was out there wasn't something I could explain. When morning finally came, the sunlight streaming through the windows felt like a relief, but the dread was still there, stuck in my gut. We didn't talk much about what happened. We just packed up our things and waited for my parents to pick us up later that day. As we left, I took one last look around the canyon, and the woods seemed different, darker, more secretive. I never went back to that cabin, and to this day, I can't shake the feeling that we stumbled into something that wasn't meant for us to see. That growl, the mimicking sounds, the slamming door, it all added up to something I still can't explain, and it left me with a fear of hidden places that's never really gone away. Story 14. I was a pretty quiet kid, more into exploring on my own than playing games with the others. That day, I'd been kicking around a soccer ball with a couple of other boys, but after a while I got bored and started wandering toward the edge of the playground. Behind the school, there was this wooded area, not huge, but dense enough that you couldn't see too far into it. I'd been told not to go in there alone, but you know how kids are. Rules don't always stick when you're curious. I remember the ground was still a little damp from the rain, and my sneakers made soft, squishing sounds as I stepped off the asphalt and onto the grass. The woods weren't far, maybe 50 feet from the edge of the playground, and I could hear the distant sounds of the picnic fading behind me. It felt like stepping into another world. The trees were mostly pines, tall and straight, with needles that made the ground spongy underfoot. I'd always liked collecting pine cones. There was something satisfying about how they felt in my hands, all rough and prickly, but also kind of beautiful. So I started picking them up one by one, stuffing them into the pockets of my jeans until they bulged. I wasn't thinking about much, just the simple joy of being alone, with the sun filtering through the branches and casting little patches of light on the forest floor. I could still faintly hear kids shouting and laughing, but it was muffled, like listening through a wall. The air in the woods was cooler, with a damp, earthy smell mixed with the sharp scent of pine. I remember feeling a little chill, even though it was a warm day, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. I must have wandered deeper than I meant to, because after a few minutes, the sounds from the picnic were almost gone. I could still see glimpses of the school through the trees if I turned around, but it felt farther away than it should have. I was bent over, reaching for a particularly big pine cone, when I heard a crackling sound off to my left. It wasn't loud, just a twig snapping, like someone stepping on it. I froze for a second, my heart giving a little jump. I figured it was probably a squirrel or a bird, but something about it felt different, heavier. I straightened up slowly, my eyes scanning the trees. Everything looked normal, just shadows and light, the same as before. But then I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. Something big and dark shifted behind a thick pine tree about 20 feet away. My breath hitched, and I felt this cold knot form in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a deer or something, but deer don't usually stand that tall. I took a step back, my sneaker sinking into the soft ground, and that's when I physically ran into it. I wasn't looking where I was going because I was still staring at where I'd seen the movement. I turned to retreat toward the playground and bam! I collided with something solid and hairy. It was like hitting a wall, but a warm, living one. I stumbled backward, falling onto my butt, and the pine cones spilled out of my pockets all around me. For a second, I was too stunned to even breathe. Then I looked up, and my brain just short-circuited. Standing over me was this huge, dark figure. It was taller than any person I'd ever seen, way taller, like 7 or 8 feet, I'd guess now. But as a kid, it felt like a giant. It was covered in thick, matted hair that was a dark brown, almost black in the shadows. The smell hit me next, a mix of wet dog, dirt, and something else. Something foul and musky that made my nose wrinkle. I couldn't see its face clearly because the light was dim, but I got the impression of broad shoulders and long arms hanging down by its sides. It didn't move, just stood there, looming over me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, a loud thumping that drowned out everything else. I was frozen, my body locked in place with fear. I remember my hands were shaking, and I could feel the dampness of the ground seeping through my jeans. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. It was like my throat had closed up. I just stared, taking in details without even meaning to. The way its hair was clumped in places, like it had been rolling in mud, and how its feet were big and bare, pressing into the soft earth. It didn't make any noise at first. No growling, no breathing I could hear. Just this intense, heavy silence. Then it took a step toward me, and the ground seemed to vibrate under its weight. I scrambled backward, my hands slipping on pine needles and dirt, but I couldn't get up. My legs felt like jelly. I kept expecting it to grab me or something, but it just watched me. Its head tilted slightly. I still couldn't see its eyes properly, but I had this overwhelming sense that it was curious, not angry. That didn't make me feel any better, though. If anything, it made it scarier because I had no idea what it wanted. I finally managed to find my voice and let out this weak, strangled cry. It wasn't a scream, more like a gasp that turned into a whimper. The sound seemed to snap something in the air because the creature, I didn't know what else to call it, took another step. And this time, it made a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl, but deep, like a hum that vibrated through my chest. I felt it more than heard it, and it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I remember thinking, this can't be real. I must be dreaming. But the cold dampness on my skin and the ache in my hands from gripping the ground told me I wasn't. I could see the pine cones scattered around me. One of them cracked from my fall, and I focused on that for a second, trying to ground myself. But then the thing moved again, and my eyes snapped back to it. It raised one of its arms slowly, and I saw how long its fingers were, almost like a person's but thicker and covered in that same dark hair. It didn't reach for me. It just pointed toward the deeper woods, as if telling me to go that way. I shook my head, my whole body trembling. "No," I whispered, though I doubt it heard me. I was crying by then, tears mixing with the dirt on my face. I wanted my mom. I wanted to be back at the picnic, eating a hot dog and listening to the other kids laugh, but I was stuck here, in this quiet, shadowy place with this thing that shouldn't exist. It took another step, and the smell got stronger, making me gag. I could see now that its feet left deep impressions in the ground, like something heavy had been standing there for a while. I noticed little details, a scar on its leg where the hair was thinner, the way its chest moved as it breathed slow and steady. It wasn't in a hurry, and that made it even more terrifying, like it had all the time in the world, and I was just this little interruption. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me on the ground, it standing over me, but it felt like forever. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot from older kids, but I never believed them. Now here it was, real and solid, and smelling like a swamp. I kept waiting for it to do something more, to attack or run away, but it just stood there, watching me. Then, from the direction of the playground, I heard a faint voice calling my name. It was my mom, I think, or maybe a teacher. The sound was distant, but it broke the spell. The creature's head turned toward the noise, and it let out this soft, almost sighing sound. Then, without another look at me, it turned and moved away, disappearing into the trees so quietly that I barely saw it go. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, like it had melted into the shadows. I stayed on the ground for what felt like a long time, shaking and crying. The woods were quiet again, just the normal sounds of birds and the rustle of leaves. I could still smell that musky odor lingering in the air. Slowly I pushed myself up, my legs wobbly. I looked around, but there was no sign of it, just the imprints in the dirt where it had stood. I didn't even think about picking up the pine cones. I just turned and ran, stumbling through the trees toward the sound of voices. When I burst out of the woods, back onto the playground, everyone was still laughing and playing like nothing had happened. The sun was bright, and the smell of food was strong. I ran straight to my mom, who was talking to another parent, and grabbed her hand. She looked down at me, concerned, and asked what was wrong. I tried to tell her, but the words came out all jumbled. Something about a big, hairy thing in the woods. She just patted my head and said I must have seen a bear or something, that I shouldn't wander off alone. I didn't push it. What could I say? No one would believe a second grader talking about a monster. I spent the rest of the picnic sitting close to my mom, not talking much, just watching the woods from a distance. Every time the wind rustled the trees, I'd flinch, expecting to see that dark figure again. The rest of the day passed in a blur. We went home, had dinner, and I went to bed, but I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying it in my head, the way it felt when I ran into it, the smell, the sound it made. For years, I didn't tell anyone else, because I knew how it sounded, but I never forgot it. Even now, decades later, I get chills thinking about that day. I've read other accounts online, and some people describe similar things. The height, the smell, the quietness. It makes me feel a little less crazy, but it doesn't take away the fear. That was it. I never saw it again, and I never went back into those woods alone. But sometimes, when I'm outside and I catch a whiff of something musky, or I hear a twig snap in the quiet, my heart still races. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will. It's just this thing that happened, stuck in my memory like a scar. And in story 15. All right, I'm just going to type this out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I've been reading this forum for a while now, and I figure if anyone might get it, it's you guys. I don't talk about this. Not with my friends, not with my family. My wife knows a little, just that I had a bad scare in the mountains and it put me off backpacking for good. But she doesn't know the details. I can't bring myself to say them out loud. Writing it feels a little easier, maybe because I can pretend it's just for me. My name's Daniel. I'm 34, from Colorado Springs. Back in August of 2015, I was a different person. I lived for the backcountry. Every spare weekend I was out there. I'd done solo trips all over the Rockies, some pretty remote stuff. I knew what I was doing, or at least, I thought I did. I was confident, maybe even a little arrogant about it. This particular trip, I decided to go poking around an old silver mine up near Silver Plume. I'd seen some photos online. The entrance was supposedly easy to get to, and I liked the history of those places. It was a Saturday morning. I remember the date. It was the 22nd. The drive up was beautiful. It was one of those crisp Colorado mornings where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. I turned off the main highway onto this rough, rutted dirt road that climbed steeply into a high valley. My truck jostled over the rocks, the suspension groaning. The air got thinner and cooler the higher I went. The valley itself was at 9,500 feet, nestled between these massive pine-covered ridges. A low, cool mist was hanging in the air, not quite burning off yet, and it made everything feel quiet and still, peaceful. That's what I thought anyway. I found a place to pull over near where the mine entrance was supposed to be. I killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was heavy. I'm used to mountain quiet, but this was different. There was no wind, no birds, not even the buzz of insects. It was a dead, absolute silence, like the whole world was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just the fog dampening all the sound. I got my gear together, my day pack with water, a sandwich, a first aid kit, and most importantly, my heavy-duty flashlight and a headlamp. I locked the truck. The sound of the door closing was way too loud, like a gunshot in that stillness. The mine entrance was exactly where the map said it would be. a dark hole in the side of the mountain, shored up with old, rotten-looking timbers. It was bigger than I expected, maybe 7 feet tall and just as wide. And that's when I saw the first thing that made the little hairs on my arms stand up. The ground in front of the entrance was soft, muddy from a recent rain, and there were footprints. They were wrong. They looked vaguely human, you know, a foot shape with 5 toes. But they were huge, I mean massive. I wear a size 12 boot, and I put my foot next to one of them. It was almost twice as long, and they were deep, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. The stride was long too, just these effortless giant steps leading right into the mine and then back out again. A cold little knot started to tighten in my stomach. Bear, I told myself. A big grizzly walking funny. But it didn't look like any bear track I'd ever seen. There was no claw mark, just this perfect, terrifying foot shape. I should have turned around right then. I know that now. But back then, I was Daniel, the experienced backpacker. Curiosity just overrode the fear. I thought, maybe it's a hoax. Some kids with a big wooden stamp. I decided to go in just for a quick look. Worst mistake of my life. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly. It was cold. A damp, earthy cold that seeped right through my jacket. The air was thick and smelled of wet rock and old rotten wood. I shone my light down the tunnel. It went back farther than I could see, just swallowed by the darkness. And that's when I noticed the second weird thing. There were no echoes. My footsteps, my breathing, the sound just died the second it left my mouth. It was like the tunnel was lined with sound-absorbing foam. That deep, muffled silence was worse than the silence outside. It felt oppressive, like a weight on my eardrums. I walked slowly, my beam playing over the walls. They were rough-hewn rock, glistening with moisture in places. Old rusted cart tracks were set into the floor, half buried in gravel. I must have gone a couple 100 yards in. My plan was to just go to the first big chamber I could find, take a few pictures and get out. The whole time, that feeling of being watched was crawling up my spine. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, something, standing in the darkness behind me. But there was only blackness. I finally reached a wider area, a sort of junction where a couple of smaller tunnels branched off. I was shining my light down one of them when I heard it. A rock clattering from up ahead toward the main tunnel's exit on the other side of the mountain. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze, listening. Nothing. Maybe it was just settling. Old mines are always making noises. I tried to convince myself of that, but my body wasn't buying it. Every muscle was tense. I decided to head for the exit. I didn't want to go back the way I came. The exit was supposedly closer. I just wanted to be out. I started moving faster, my boots crunching unnaturally loud in the dead air. The tunnel began to slope upwards, and I could see a pinprick of daylight way up ahead. Relief washed over me. Almost there, and then I saw the movement, right near the exit, where the tunnel widened out just before the opening. A shadow detached itself from the wall. No, not a shadow, it was solid. It moved into the middle of the tunnel, blocking the way out completely. My flashlight beam hit it, and my brain just stuttered. It couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall, so damn tall. It had to be over 8 feet, and it was built thick through the chest and shoulders. It was covered head to toe in shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black in the dim light. Its head was kind of conical, sitting right on its shoulders with no real neck. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, and its eyes. When my light hit its face, its eyes glinted. Not like an animal's eyeshine, but a flat, intelligent glint, like it was looking right back at me, right into me. I stopped dead. I couldn't breathe. It was just standing there, facing me. It didn't make a sound. I was trapped. Behind me was hundreds of yards of pitch-black tunnel. In front of me was this thing that shouldn't exist. This thing from a campfire story was standing 50 feet away from me in a Colorado silver mine, and it had me cornered. That's when the terror really hit me. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a full-body, primal, screaming terror. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the flashlight. I could feel a cold sweat break out all over my body. This was it. This was how I was going to die, in a hole in the ground, and no one would ever know what happened to me. It took a step forward. It didn't lunge or charge. It just took one slow, deliberate step. The way it moved was wrong. It was too smooth, too balanced for something that big. It was studying me. I could feel its gaze. Then it made this low sound, not a growl, more like a deep, rumbling hum that I felt in my teeth. It was intelligent. I knew it right then. This wasn't just some dumb animal. It had herded me in here. It had known I was coming, and it had positioned itself between me and the way out. It took another step, and then another, closing the distance. It was maybe 30 feet away now. I could smell it. A musky, wild smell, like a wet dog and old, turned over earth. I was backing up, my legs feeling like jelly. My back hit the tunnel wall and I flinched. There was nowhere to go. It stopped again and tilted its head. Then it opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't from this world. It was a roar, but it was so much more than that. It was deafening, a guttural, shrieking roar that felt like it was tearing the air apart. It was so loud it was physical. I felt it vibrate through the soles of my boots, up my legs, right into my bones. Dust and little bits of rock rained down from the tunnel ceiling, pattering on my head and shoulders. The roar echoed, not in the normal way, but in that strange, muffled way everything did in there, making it sound like it was coming from everywhere at once. It was a sound of pure, raw power and rage, and it was meant for me. That roar broke the last bit of my nerve. I was sobbing, I think, just sheer panic tears. I was going to die. It started advancing again, faster now. It dropped its head a little, and I could hear it sniffing the air, loud, wet sniffs. Then a low, continuous growl started rumbling in its chest, a sound that promised violence. My mind was racing, a frantic, useless scramble. I was pressed against the wall, my fingers scrabbling at the cold, wet rock. My hand closed around a loose piece of stone, about the size of my fist. I didn't even think. It was pure, blind instinct. As it took another step, now only 20 feet away, I hurled the rock as hard as I could. Not at it. I wasn't that stupid. I threw it sideways across the tunnel, to my left, toward one of the branching passages I'd seen earlier. The rock hit the wall with a sharp crack. The thing's head snapped toward the sound instantly. The growling stopped. It was distracted. For maybe 2 seconds, its attention was off me. That was all I had. I didn't think. I just moved. I pushed off the wall and I ran. I sprinted straight for the exit, straight for the space where it had been standing. I've never moved that fast in my life. It was like my feet weren't even touching the ground. I heard a furious, surprised snarl from my left as I passed it. I felt a rush of air, and then a searing, hot pain exploded in my right shoulder as I slammed into the rocky edge of the tunnel wall. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I burst out of the mine entrance into the blinding sunlight. The world outside was still and silent, just like before, but now it felt like heaven. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran down the slope, my lungs burning in the thin air, my shoulder screaming in pain. I stumbled over rocks, fell once, scrambled back to my feet without even feeling my scraped knees. All I could think was, get to the truck, get to the truck. I saw my truck and I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get the key in the lock. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and hit the locks. I sat there, gasping, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. I kept expecting to see it come crashing out of the trees, to see that massive dark shape bearing down on me. I started the engine, slammed the truck into gear, and spun it around, spraying gravel everywhere. I drove down that mountain road like a man possessed, not caring about the ruts or the rocks banging against the undercarriage. I didn't slow down until I was back on the paved highway with other cars around me. A few days later, I called a wildlife investigation hotline. I didn't give my name, I just told them where I'd been and what I'd seen. I heard later, through a friend of a friend who's a ranger, that they went up there. They found tracks, 17-inch tracks, and they found fresh scrape marks on the tunnel wall right where I'd run past the thing, along with some strange, coarse brown hairs caught in the splintered wood. I haven't been backcountry camping since, not once. I sold all my gear. I get anxious if I'm even in a heavily wooded park for too long. My shoulder has a nasty scar from where I hit the wall. But that's not the worst of it. The worst part is the sound. At night, when it's quiet, I can still hear it. That roar, it echoes in my head, that same muffled, bone-shaking roar, and I'm right back in that tunnel, trapped in the dark, with something that knew exactly what it was doing. I don't know what it was. I don't care what anyone calls it. I just know I was there, and it was real, and it... Story 16. It was one of those perfect Colorado spring mornings where the air just smells clean, you know, like pine and damp earth and something else. Something sweet that I could never quite name. The sky was that hard, clear blue you only seem to get way up in the mountains. Mike, my husband, was already up and making coffee when I stumbled into the kitchen. He'd gotten the wild hare to go raspberry picking. There's this patch way up in the rugged hills behind our house that we'd been eyeing for a couple of weeks. The berries there are always the best. Fat and dark red, almost black, and so sweet they don't even need sugar. We'd inherited this land from his family. A vast, sprawling piece of wilderness that still feels more theirs than ours, even after all these years. It's a beautiful, lonely place, and we're not alone on it. We've known that for a long time. There's a group of them, Sasquatch, we figure maybe 20 or so, that live deep in the most inaccessible parts of the property. We've found their tracks, heard their calls echoing through the canyons at night, seen glimpses from a distance. We have an understanding, a sort of peaceful coexistence. We don't bother them, they don't bother us. It's been that way for years. So, berry picking. It felt normal, a nice thing to do on a sunny day. We grabbed our buckets, old plastic ones that were stained purple from seasons past, and headed out. The climb is always a bitch. It's steep, and the ground is loose shale and tangled roots. You have to watch every step. The sun was warm on my back, but in the shadows under the trees, the air was still cool. We were both sweating and breathing hard by the time we reached the ridge that overlooks the gully. The gully is a deep, sharp cut in the landscape, maybe 100 feet across at its widest point. On the other side, the hill climbs up again, thick with pine and aspen. That's where the best berry bushes are, nestled in a sunny break in the trees. We were just about to start picking when Mike froze. He didn't say anything, just went completely still and pointed with his chin across the gully. My heart did this little stutter skip. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees and shadows. Then, the shadows moved. 2 of them. They were tall, way taller than a man, and covered in dark, shaggy hair. They were just standing there, partially hidden by the tree line, looking down into the gully themselves. One was bigger, broader in the shoulders. The other was slightly smaller, maybe a female or a younger one. They were just observing. There was a calmness to them that was almost peaceful. Mike's eyes were wide. He's a big guy, not easily spooked, but I could see the pulse hammering in his neck. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out his little digital camera. It's not a fancy one, just a point and shoot we keep for snapping pictures of wildlife. I'm going to try to get closer, he whispered, his voice tight with excitement. Get a picture. You stay here. Stay low. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Mike, I don't know, I whispered back. What if they see you? They won't. I'll circle around, come up from downwind. I'll be quiet. He gave my arm a squeeze, the kind that's supposed to be reassuring but just felt desperate. Before I could argue more, he was moving, crouching low and heading off to the right, planning to loop down into the gully and come up the other side. So I was left alone. I ducked behind a thick, scratchy juniper bush, the needles poking through my shirt. The sun was in my eyes now, glinting off the camera lens as Mike picked his way down the slope. He moved well for a big man, quiet and careful. My eyes were glued to the two figures across the way. They hadn't moved. They were like statues, dark sentinels against the green of the pines. Time stretched out. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a whooshing sound that was louder than the breeze. My legs started to cramp from crouching, but I didn't dare move. Mike had reached the bottom of the gully and was starting his climb up the other side. He was being so quiet. I was proud of him and terrified for him. That's when it happened. One of the Sasquatch, the bigger one, its head tilted, just a slight, almost imperceptible movement. It had heard something. A dislodged pebble, the crunch of a pine cone under Mike's boot. I don't know. But it heard him, and in that moment, everything changed. The calm, observing presence vanished, replaced by a swift, silent urgency. They didn't run. They didn't make a sound. They moved backwards, melting into the tree line. And then they did something I still have a hard time wrapping my head around. They pressed themselves against the trunks of these skinny basswood trees. They didn't just stand behind them. They wrapped their arms and legs around the trunks, and they just blended. It wasn't magic. It was camouflage. Their dark, shaggy fur, the way they contorted their bodies, the shadows of the trees. They became part of the landscape. If I hadn't been watching them do it, I would have sworn the spot was empty. They were invisible. My breath caught in my throat. It was a thick, painful lump. Mike was still climbing, oblivious. He was heading right for them. He was going to walk within feet of these two massive, hidden creatures. I could see the exact path he was on. He would pass between the two trees. They were wrapped around. I started to shake. A fine, uncontrollable tremor that started in my hands and ran all the way through my body. I wanted to scream, to yell his name, to wave my arms, anything to stop him, but the fear was a physical weight on my chest, crushing the air out of my lungs. If I made a sound, if I startled them, what would they do? They were hiding from him. If they felt cornered, if they felt threatened, that peaceful coexistence would be over in a heartbeat. I'd heard stories, read accounts online of the power they have. They could tear him apart before he even knew what was happening. My mind was racing, a frantic, silent scream inside my head. Don't see them, Mike. Just keep walking. Just look down. Please, just look down. But he didn't. He was focused on the spot where he'd last seen them, his camera held ready. He was so close now. I could see the concentration on his face, the beads of sweat on his temple. 10 feet, 5 feet. He passed the first tree. I held my breath. The hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up. I could feel every single pine needle digging into my skin through my jeans. My heart was beating so hard, I thought it would crack a rib. He was right between them. He paused, looking around confused. He knew they should be there. He scanned the area, his head moving slowly, and then, by some miracle, his gaze drifted across the gully toward my hiding spot. Our eyes met. It was all the opening I needed. I didn't think, I just moved. I shot my hand out from behind the bush, not caring about being subtle anymore. I pointed a frantic jabbing motion right at the trees he was standing between. My face must have been a mask of pure panic. I saw the confusion in his eyes, then a dawning comprehension as he saw the sheer terror on my face. He started to turn, to look behind him. That's when the forest exploded. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a movement. The two basswood trees seemed to shudder. A cascade of pine needles and bark fragments showered down as the two Sasquatch uncoiled themselves from the trunks in one fluid, powerful motion. There was no growl, no roar, just the rustle of fur and the soft thud of massive feet hitting the ground. Mike jerked back, a short, sharp cry escaping his lips. He fumbled with the camera, dropping it into the leaf litter. His training, his instinct took over. His hand went to his hip, to the .357 Magnum revolver he always carries when we're out this far. He drew it in one smooth, practiced motion, the metallic click of the hammer being cocked obscenely loud in the sudden silence. The two creatures were fully revealed now, standing to their full, immense height. They were even bigger up close than I'd realized. The smell hit me then, carried on the breeze, a powerful, musky odor, like a wet dog mixed with wild mushrooms and old, rich soil. The bigger one was staring right at Mike, at the gun in his hand. Its eyes, I'll never forget its eyes. They were deep-set and intelligent, and in that moment, they held no fear. Just a kind of ancient, assessing calm. It knew what the gun was. For a second that felt like a lifetime. Nobody moved. Mike stood with the gun leveled, his arms shaking. The two Sasquatch stood facing him, their chests rising and falling with deep, slow breaths. The air was thick with the potential for violence. One twitch, one wrong move, and the gully would be filled with the sound of a gunshot, and something far, far worse. Then, the big one let out a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a low, guttural huff. A puff of air. It glanced at the smaller one, and then, in a movement so fast my eyes could barely track it, they turned and leaped. They didn't run. They leaped. One moment they were there, the next they were 10 feet up the hill, their powerful legs propelling them in bounds that seemed to defy their size. They crashed through the undergrowth, not with panic, but with a raw, explosive power that was terrifying to witness. In 2-3 more bounds, they were over the crest of the hill and gone. The sound of their movement faded almost instantly, swallowed by the vast, quiet forest. The silence they left behind was deafening. Mike slowly lowered the gun. His hand was trembling so badly he had to use the other one to uncock the hammer and slide it back into its holster. He just stood there, staring at the empty space where they'd been. He was pale, his face slick with sweat. I stumbled out from behind the bush, my legs so weak I almost fell. I scrambled down into the gully and up the other side, not caring about the thorns tearing at my clothes. I reached him and just grabbed his arm, holding on tight, feeling the solid, real warmth of him. We didn't speak. We just stood there, clinging to each other, breathing in ragged gasps. The smell of them still hung in the air, a stark reminder. After a few minutes, Mike bent down and picked up his camera. He looked at it, then out towards the hill they'd vanished over. They wrapped themselves around the trees, he said, his voice hoarse. I was standing right next to them. I didn't see a thing. We didn't pick any berries that day. We just went home. The walk back was quiet, both of us lost in our own heads, replaying those few seconds over and over. The sudden emergence, the sheer size of them, the look in that creature's eyes, the smell. The terror wasn't in any attack. The terror was in the potential. It was in the understanding of how easily it could have gone the other way. We'd been complacent in our coexistence. We'd forgotten the raw, wild power we were sharing our land with. That was a few months ago. We still see their signs. We still hear them at night. The understanding is still there, but it feels more fragile now, more earned. We've bought better cameras, trail cams with night vision. We talk about trying for another encounter, but it's a nervous, excited kind of talk. We're more careful now. We know what they can do. We know how clever they are. We cherish the peace, but we also know it's a peace that exists on a knife's edge. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I catch that musky, earthy smell on the air, and my heart starts to pound all over again, remembering the day the shadows came to life and then disappeared back into the trees, leaving us standing there shaken, with nothing but the memory of their eyes and the chilling knowledge of how close we came. Story 17. That night, I was up late, like I often am, just sitting in the family room watching TV. It was around 2 in the morning, and the house was dead quiet, except for the low hum of the television. My spouse was asleep upstairs, and the foster kids were in their rooms. We had a couple staying with us at the time, but they'd been quiet for hours. The family room has these big windows that look straight out into the forest, and usually I like that. It feels peaceful, like you're part of nature. But that night, it felt different. The darkness outside was thick, almost heavy, and the trees were just shadows against the sky. I was halfway through some late-night show, not really paying attention, when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, or maybe a branch moving in the wind. But then I saw it. A dark mass pressed against one of the windows. It was big, like taller than a person, and it was just standing there. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it was probably a deer or something. We get them around here all the time, so I tried to ignore it and kept watching TV, but I couldn't help glancing over every few seconds. After a while, I decided to turn off the TV and head to bed. The moment I clicked the remote and the screen went black, the room plunged into darkness, and that's when I saw the mass shift. It wasn't a slow movement. It was quick, like it knew I was looking. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. I couldn't see details, just this huge dark shape that seemed to lean in closer to the glass. I felt this cold sweat break out all over my body, and my hands started trembling. I knew I should have gotten up and checked, but I was too scared to move. So I did the only thing I could think of. I stayed in my recliner, pulled the blanket over me, and tried to sleep. It was fitful, with every little sound making me jump, and I kept my eyes on that window until exhaustion finally took over. I woke up around 6 in the morning, still in the chair, with the first light of dawn filtering through the windows. My neck was stiff and I felt groggy, but as I stretched, my eyes landed on the window where I'd seen the dark mass, and that's when I saw them, the handprints. 2 massive handprints smeared on the glass, like someone or something had pressed against it with enough force to leave a mark. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding, and walked closer. The prints were huge, each one about 12 inches long, from the base of the palm to the tip of the middle finger. I know because I used to work in law enforcement doing fingerprinting, so I've seen my share of hands. But these weren't human. The fingers were longer than any I'd ever seen, about 4 inches longer than a tall man's hand would be. I measured them later with a tape measure, and just staring at them made my stomach twist. My mind raced. Whatever made those prints had to be around 9 feet tall, based on the spread and the height on the window. I felt a wave of dizziness, and I had to lean against the wall to steady myself. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely make a fist. I remember the cold feeling spreading through my chest, like ice water had been poured into me. I stumbled to the phone and called my sister first. She lives a few towns over, and my voice was so shaky I could hardly get the words out. I told her what I'd seen, and she said I should call the police, but I couldn't. See, we're foster parents, and I was worried that if I reported something like this, it might cause problems with the agency. They might think we're unstable or something, and I didn't want to risk the kids being moved. After I hung up, I went upstairs and woke my spouse. I was still trembling, and when I described the handprints, their eyes went wide. We went back down together, and they saw the prints too. We just stood there for what felt like an hour, not saying much, just staring at the glass. The prints were smudgy, like they'd been made with some kind of grime or mud, but there was something off about them. When I looked closer, I realized there was no ridge detail, no fingerprints at all. In all my years working with prints, I'd never seen anything like it. Human hands have ridges and whorls, but these were smooth, like the skin was too thick or something. That's when the real terror hit me. This wasn't some prank or animal. It was something else. We decided to clean the windows, mostly because we didn't want the kids seeing it and getting scared. I grabbed some vinegar and a cloth, we always use that for cleaning, and started wiping. but the substance on the glass didn't come off easily. It was sticky, almost greasy, and it left a residue that took a lot of scrubbing to remove. Even after we got most of it off, there was a faint outline that stayed for days, like a ghost of those prints. Every time I looked at it, I felt that chill again. Later that day, things got even weirder. We have a dog, a big German shepherd named Max, and he's usually calm. But around midday, he started acting strange. He was pacing by the back door, growling low in his throat. Then, as it got darker outside, he let out this scream. I've never heard a dog make a sound like that. It was high-pitched and full of fear, and it made the hair on my arm stand up. Right after that, something hit the side of the house. It wasn't a tap. It was a hard thud, like a giant fist slamming into the wall. The whole house shook, and I heard things rattling on the shelves. A picture frame fell and shattered, and some vinyl siding came loose outside. I ran to the window and saw nothing, but I could feel something out there watching. My spouse and I huddled together, too scared to go outside. We thought about calling for help, but what would we say? That something big was hitting our house? It sounded crazy, so we just waited, listening to every creak and groan. A few hours later, around what must have been 1 in the morning, I saw another set of handprints on a different window. Same size, same smooth texture. This time, they were higher up, like whatever it was had stretched to peer inside. I felt a lump in my throat and I couldn't stop shaking. We tried cleaning them again with vinegar, but the substance was just as stubborn, and it felt like it was soaking into the glass. I remembered the foster kids had mentioned seeing a big man near the pond in the backyard a few weeks earlier. At the time, I thought it was just their imagination, but now it all made sense. We'd installed a dog kennel recently to keep Max safe, and ever since, whatever this thing is had gotten bolder. It was like it knew we were trying to protect ourselves, and it didn't care. By the end of that day, I was exhausted and terrified. We talked about setting up a wildlife camera to catch evidence, but I was too scared to even step outside. The thought of seeing that thing on film made my skin crawl. I kept peering out the windows, expecting to see those massive hands or that dark mass again, but everything was quiet. Too quiet. It was like the forest was holding its breath, and I knew deep down that it wasn't over. I still don't know what it was. Maybe a bear or something else, but bears don't leave handprints like that. To this day, I can't explain it, and I never feel safe in my own home anymore. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and just listen, waiting for something to happen again. But it's been quiet since then, and that almost scares me more, because whatever was out there, it's still out there, and I have no idea when it might come back. Story 18. All right, I'm just going to type this out. I've been sitting on it for a while, but after reading some stuff on here, I figured maybe someone will get it. I don't know what I saw, not really, but I know it wasn't anything I'd ever seen before, and I know it wasn't just in my head. My name's Shannon. This was back in the summer, a few years ago now. I was working with a highway paving crew. We were way out in the middle of nowhere, a remote section of road near Mount St. Helens in Skamania County, Washington. If you've never been out there, it's hard to describe just how empty it can feel. The trees are so thick and dark they just swallow the light, and the mountains are always there, looming over you. The air smells like pine and wet dirt, and when the machines are off, the silence is so heavy it feels like a weight on your chest. We'd been on this stretch for a couple of days. The job was straightforward but monotonous. My job was to walk alongside the big paving machine, the paver, and keep an eye on the asphalt flow, make sure the grade was right, that kind of thing. It's loud, dirty work. The machine grumbles and roars, and the heat coming off the fresh blacktop is intense, like opening an oven door. You get into a rhythm after a while, your boots sticking a little to the cooling edges of the pavement, the high-vis vest feeling heavier and heavier as the day goes on. That morning started like any other. It was a Tuesday, I think. The sky was overcast, the kind of grey that makes the green of the firs and hemlocks look almost impossibly vibrant. We'd started at sunrise, and by mid-morning we'd hit our stride. I was walking on the shoulder, the crushed gravel crunching under my boots, my eyes mostly on the seam where the new asphalt was meeting the old road. I happened to look up, just a routine glance towards the tree line to my left. The forest was maybe 30-40 feet away, a solid wall of green and shadow, and that's when I saw the movement. It wasn't a flicker. It wasn't a branch swaying. It was a shift, a big one. My eyes snapped to it, and my brain just stalled. Between two massive fir trees there was a figure. It was standing upright, and it was tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be at least a foot taller than me, maybe more. 7 feet, easy. It was covered in hair, this long, shaggy brown hair that looked matted in places, like it had been through rain and mud. It wasn't a uniform color. It was darker on its back and shoulders, lighter on its chest and arms. It was just standing there, not moving, just watching. My feet stopped moving. I could still feel the vibration of the paver through the soles of my boots, but the sound of it seemed to fade into a dull roar in the background. All my focus was on that thing in the trees. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down by its sides, and its hands, I couldn't see fingers clearly, but the arms hung so low its knuckles were almost brushing the ferns and salal on the ground. Its legs were thick, powerful looking, like tree trunks, but it was the face that really froze the blood in my veins. The hair on its head was long, falling around its face, but it wasn't completely covered. I could see a patch of darker, leathery skin. And its eyes. They were the only part of its face that was completely clear. They weren't glowing or red or anything like in the movies. They were just dark, deep set, and they were locked right on me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a direct, unwavering stare. I felt seen in a way I'd never felt before. It was like being stripped bare, like it was looking right through my skin and into the frantic, terrified animal inside me. A wave of pure, cold terror washed over me so hard I actually felt dizzy. My heart wasn't just pounding. It was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful drumbeat. My mouth went completely dry. I couldn't look away. I was trapped in its gaze. My co-worker, Gary, was about 10 feet ahead of me, his back to the woods, watching the traffic cone pattern. I stumbled forward a couple of steps, my legs feeling like rubber. I grabbed his sleeve. He turned, annoyed at first. "Gary," I whispered. My voice was a dry croak. I had to force the words out. "Don't turn around fast. Just look, in the trees, between the two big firs." He frowned, squinting at me like I was crazy, but he slowly turned his head. He looked for a second, then two. He shook his head. "What? I don't see anything, Shannon. A stump?" "No," I hissed, my voice a little stronger, fueled by panic. "It's right there. It's looking at us." He looked again, longer this time, scanning the tree line. He shrugged, turning fully back to me. "There's nothing there, man. You're seeing things. It's the heat haze off the asphalt, or a weird shadow." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Drink some water. You're dehydrated." The frustration mixed with the fear making me feel sick. "It's right there!" I wanted to scream, but I just pointed with my chin, my eyes darting back to it, and it was still there. It hadn't moved. It hadn't ducked back into the shadows or lunged forward. It was just standing, guarding. That's the word that popped into my head. It wasn't hiding. It was just present, like it was a part of the forest that had decided to stand up and watch us for a while. I kept staring, my body tense, waiting for it to do something, anything, a charge, a roar, a retreat. But nothing happened. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only another minute, I saw it shift its weight. It was a subtle movement, one foot adjusting slightly, its massive shoulders rolling just a fraction. It was a living, breathing thing, not a statue, but it didn't break its stare. The sheer wrongness of it was overwhelming. My brain kept trying to file it under bear, but it was all wrong. Bears don't stand that straight for that long. Their shoulders are built different. Their faces are snouts. This thing had a flatter face, a human-like structure beneath all that hair. It wasn't a man in a suit either. No suit moves that naturally, and no man is that big or has that kind of effortless, powerful stillness. This was something else, something I had no category for. The fear was a physical thing. It was a cold knot in my stomach. It was the prickle of sweat on my scalp under my hard hat. It was the way my hands were trembling so bad I had to shove them into the pockets of my jeans. I was acutely aware of how exposed I was, standing on this bare strip of gravel between the hot pavement and that dark, endless wall of trees. The foreman's whistle blew, signaling our mid-morning break. The sound was like a gunshot, jolting me out of my trance. The paver ground to a halt. The sudden drop in noise was jarring. I forced myself to look away from the figure for a second to see the crew shutting down machines, heading towards the trucks for water and a few minutes of shade. When I looked back, my heart in my throat, the space between the two fir trees was empty. Just empty. There was no movement, no sound of something large crashing away through the undergrowth, no indication that anything had ever been there. The ferns weren't even disturbed. It was as if it had simply dissolved back into the shadows. I stood there for a full minute, just staring at that spot, half expecting it to reappear. It didn't. The rest of the break was a blur. I walked to the water cooler on shaky legs, my mind racing. I grabbed a paper cone and filled it, my hands still unsteady, water sloshing over the sides. I tried to act normal. Gary gave me a look, a mix of pity and amusement. "See, nothing there, told you." I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I couldn't tell him that its disappearance was almost more terrifying than its presence. How does something that big and solid just vanish without a sound? We worked in that same area for the rest of the week, finishing that section of road. Every single day, every minute I was on that shoulder, my eyes were glued to the tree line. I'd jump at every squirrel, every bird taking flight. The forest, which had just been background before, now felt alive and watching. The shadows between the trunks seemed deeper, more menacing. The normal sounds of the woods, the chirping, the rustling, started to sound like signals, like warnings. I tried to tell a couple of the other guys about it later that week, when we were packed up for the day having a beer back at the motel. I didn't lead with the big dramatic description. I just said, "Hey, you guys ever see anything weird out in those woods, like something big?" They laughed. One of them, Rick, smirked and said, "What, you see Bigfoot, Morgan?" And they all had a good chuckle. I forced a smile, played it off. "Nah, just a big deer or something spooked me." But inside, the dread was settling in, becoming a permanent part of me, because I know what I saw. I know the feeling of those eyes on me, a feeling so primal and terrifying I can still summon it if I close my eyes. It wasn't aggressive, it didn't threaten me, it just watched, and in a way that was worse. The not knowing, the complete lack of context for what that thing was, what it wanted, why it was there. We paved that road and moved on. I never saw it again, but I think about it all the time, especially when I'm driving through a wooded area or when I'm out hiking. I find myself scanning the trees, not for wildlife, but for a stillness that doesn't belong, for a shape that's too tall and too upright. I think about the vast, untouched wilderness around Mount St. Helens, all those miles of land where no one ever goes. We think we've mapped everything, figured everything out. We pave our roads and build our towns and act like we own the place. But that day, for a few minutes, I got a glimpse of something that reminded me we don't, not even close. There are things in those woods that don't care about our roads or our machines. They were there long before us, and my gut tells me they'll be there long after we're gone. And sometimes it was a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays are usually quiet around here. The sun was just starting to come up, maybe around 5:30 in the morning, and the sky was that pale grey color that makes everything look washed out. I'd been up for a while, sipping coffee on the porch, trying to shake off this weird feeling that had been hanging over me for weeks. See, Our farm has this old tobacco barn out back. It's been there since my granddad's time, and it's falling apart in places, all weathered wood and sagging roof. For as long as I can remember, there's always been this sense around it, like someone's watching you from the shadows. Not all the time, but enough that you notice it. I'd brush it off as nerves, but lately it had been getting worse. That morning, the dogs were acting up again. We have two big German shepherds, Duke and Bear, and they're usually fearless. They'll chase off coyotes or stray dogs without a second thought, but whenever we got near that barn, they'd change. Their ears would go flat, tails would tuck between their legs, and they'd whine like puppies. It only happened in that one spot, nowhere else on the property. I remember looking over at them that morning as I finished my coffee, and they were both crouched by the steps, staring toward the barn like they'd seen a ghost. Duke was trembling, and Bear had this low growl in his throat. But it wasn't his usual, "I'm gonna bite something" growl. It was scared, almost pleading. I tried to ignore it and headed out to check the fences like I do every morning. The air felt heavy, like before a storm, but the forecast was clear. As I walked toward the pasture, I could feel that familiar prickling on the back of my neck, the kind that makes you want to look over your shoulder every few steps. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just the wind or maybe a deer moving in the woods. But the woods here are thick, mostly oak and pine, and they've always felt alive in a way that's not always friendly. I've lived here my whole life, and I know every sound, every smell. But lately, there'd been things I couldn't explain. A couple of weeks back, we'd found this huge pile of scat near the barn. I mean, it was massive, bigger than anything I'd ever seen from a bear or coyote. It was dark, almost black, and had chunks of fur and seeds mixed in. I poked at it with a stick, and it smelled rank, like rotting meat and something else I can't even describe. We don't have bears around here. The last one was spotted years ago, and this wasn't bear scat anyway. Bears leave berries and grass in theirs, but this had fur, like from a deer or something, and seeds that looked like they came from the woods. My dad, when he was alive, used to say that if you see something like that, it's best to leave it alone, so I did. But it stuck in my mind. That Tuesday, though, things escalated. After checking the fences, I decided to take a walk toward the back pasture where we keep the horses. The grass was wet with dew and my boots were soaking through, but I didn't care. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. As I got closer, I saw one of the deer that sometimes graze near the tree line. It was lying on its side, and from a distance I thought it was sleeping. But when I got nearer, my stomach dropped. The deer was dead, and its side was torn open with these deep claw marks, 3 parallel gashes, like from something huge. The wounds were fresh, blood still dark and sticky, and flies were already buzzing around. I've seen coyote kills before, but coyotes don't leave marks like that. They go for the throat or the belly, not slashes that look like they came from a giant hand. My heart started pounding, and that uneasy feeling turned into full-blown dread. I hurried over to the horse paddock where our mare, Daisy, was standing by the fence. She's usually calm, but that day she was skittish, her eyes wide and her nostrils flared. When I got close, I saw similar marks on her flank. 3 long scratches, not deep enough to be life-threatening, but angry and red, like she'd been swiped by something. She flinched when I touched her, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Whatever did this was big, and it was still around. I stood there for a minute, just staring at the woods, and that's when the silence hit me. Normally, the woods are noisy, birds chirping, squirrels chattering, the rustle of leaves. But that morning, it was dead quiet, like everything was holding its breath. The hair on my arms stood up, and I had this overwhelming sense that I was being watched, not just glanced at, but stared at, like something was sizing me up from the trees. I could feel eyes on me, and it wasn't my imagination. It was a physical weight, like a pressure in the air. I decided to head back to the house, but first, I wanted to check the barn. Maybe I'd find some clue, something to explain all this. The barn is about 100 yards from the house. and as I walked toward it, the dogs started barking like crazy from the porch. They weren't coming with me. They were rooted to the spot, barking in that high-pitched way that says danger. I should have turned back, but I kept going, my legs feeling like lead. The barn door was partly open, creaking in the slight breeze. Inside, it's dark and musty, with shafts of light cutting through the cracks in the walls. I stepped in, and the smell hit me. That same rotten smell from the scat, but stronger, mixed with the scent of old hay and damp wood. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the corner, near where we store some tools, there was another pile of that scat, fresher this time, and next to it, the ground was disturbed, like something had been digging or dragging something. There were footprints too, but not like any animal I've ever seen. They were huge, longer than my boot, and wide, with what looked like toes pressed into the mud. I knelt down to get a closer look, and that's when I heard it, a low, guttural sound from outside, like a deep growl mixed with a groan. It wasn't loud, but it carried, vibrating through the air and into my bones. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound came again, closer this time, from the direction of the woods. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking, and peered out through a gap in the wall. That's when I saw movement in the trees, something big and dark, shifting between the trunks. It was too far away to make out details, but it was tall, way taller than a man, and it moved with a strange, lumbering grace. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its presence, like a cold wave washing over me. My breath caught in my throat, and I ducked down, hoping it hadn't seen me. The growling sound stopped, and for a second, everything was silent again. Then, from right outside the barn, came a sniffing sound, loud and wet like a dog, but deeper. I could hear it moving around, its footsteps heavy and slow, thump, thump, thump. Each step made the ground vibrate slightly. I crouched behind an old crate, trying to make myself small, and I could smell that rank odor again, stronger now, like it was right there with me. My skin was crawling, and I felt sweat trickling down my back despite the chill. I didn't dare look, but I could sense it. Whatever it was investigating the barn, maybe smelling me. I don't know how long I stayed there, maybe minutes, maybe hours, but it felt like an eternity. My muscles were tense, and every little sound made me jump. Then the footsteps moved away, fading toward the woods. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore before I risked peeking out. The area outside was empty, but the feeling of being watched was still there, intense and suffocating. I bolted from the barn, running back to the house as fast as I could. My legs were shaking so bad I almost fell, and I didn't look back until I was on the porch with the dogs. They were still whining, pressed against the door like they wanted to get inside. I let us all in and locked the door, my hands fumbling with the knob. I spent the rest of the day inside, jumping at every noise, staring out the windows at the woods. As evening fell, I saw something that sealed it for me. From the kitchen window, I spotted a figure at the edge of the tree line, tall, dark, and silhouetted against the fading light. It stood there for a moment, just watching the house, then turned and disappeared into the shadows. I didn't sleep that night, and I haven't felt safe since. I've told a couple of people about this, but they just shrug it off or say it was a bear, even though I know it wasn't. The claw marks, the scat, the sounds, none of it fits, and that feeling of being watched, it's still there, especially near the barn. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. All I know is that something was out there that day, something big and unknown, and it left me with a fear that stuck with me ever since. I still go out to do my chores, but I'm always looking over my shoulder, always listening for that growl. And every time I pass that old tobacco barn, I get chills, like it's waiting for me.